Marvel, Plundering the Multiverse, starting with the horse charm. Chapter 21. Su Ling completely ignored Weasel's resistant gaze and continued. I need C4 explosives. The bar seemed to fall silent for 2 seconds at that moment. Weasel himself was petrified on the spot, as if struck by lightning. C4. C4. Explosives. After a full 3 seconds, he finally managed to blurt out. Wait a minute, what did you just say, you need C4. Weasel. The next second, he shook his head violently, almost creating afterimages. Are you crazy? Are you addicted to being a vigilante? Su Ling smiled, appearing very calm instead. Don't worry, I won't abuse it. I don't believe a word you say. Weasel's face was turning red. Are you planning to upgrade yourself to Captain Box Demolition? That's a good name, I'll consider it next time. Weasel was already regretting not having kicked Su Ling out of the bar earlier. He adjusted his breathing and continued. No deal. Do you think C4 is candy? You can just buy it whenever you want. That stuff is too difficult to get. Even for that lunatic Wade, I've only gotten it for him a few times. Not to mention you, who just got promoted a few days ago, Captain. Captain Box. Weasel almost choked on the title. Su Ling wasn't in a hurry at all. He had already anticipated Weasel's outburst. After tapping his fingertips on the table 3 times, he slowly said. Don't rush, let me see this black card commission first. I need commissions related to the Skull Society. The Skull Society is an old-school gang that has been around since the 1990s. Human trafficking, arms smuggling, underground casinos, there's almost nothing they aren't involved in. Weasel was caught off guard by Su Ling's words. He glanced at the Asian teenager with some confusion, hesitated, then turned to rummage through the drawer behind him. A few minutes later, 3 shiny black commission cards were pushed in front of Su Ling. Here, these 3 are all. Before he could finish, Su Ling reached out and, with a swoosh, swept all the black cards towards himself. He spoke without even looking at them. I'll take all these black card missions. And all the rewards are yours. I only want C4. Night fog permeated the air. On a street in Brooklyn, Su Ling stood in the shadows, half swallowed by the darkness. His hands were in his pockets, irregularly tapping the 3 black cards. Black cards symbolized high risk and death. But they also represented truly. Eliminate the field team, destroy the warehouse, kill the leader. Doesn't seem too difficult. Su Ling chuckled, he always felt that the mercenary profession suited him perfectly. The reason Su Ling tucked the 3 black cards into his embrace wasn't blind confidence. The Skull Society gang was the organization he had the most contact with during his days as the box hero. At least 3 of the 15 system progress items were clearly related to the Skull Society. Su Ling hadn't even used his bug card ability on these 3, which was enough to show that the Skull Society's sin concentration was extremely high. More importantly, although Su Ling lived on the west bank of Manhattan, Brooklyn was still 10 kilometers away. A gang that could so easily infiltrate 2 urban areas further demonstrated the terrifying reach of the Skull Society's gang influence. The bigger, the dirtier. The dirtier, the more sinful. To other mercenaries, these black card commissions were simply suicide missions. But to Su Ling, weren't these just experience packs? He could use bug cards, but he really couldn't bring himself to indiscriminately kill innocents. So, his sights were set on the Skull Society. Another important reason was time. Su Ling certainly knew that with his current state and the life-extending ability of the horse talisman, he was a monstrous existence in the eyes of ordinary people. But this was the Marvel Universe. In this world, where alien fleets appear at the drop of a hat and cosmic lunatics descend every now and then, it's simply not enough. The sooner he becomes stronger, the more initiative he will have in future major events. From meeting Wade and seeing information about Stark Industries in the newspaper, Su Ling roughly understood the timeline he was in. But the problem lies here. The Marvel Universe's timeline is notoriously accelerated. It might still be peaceful a week from now. Next week, New York might be raided by the Chitauri. The week after that, Thanos might be considering snapping his fingers. Su Ling never forgot the path he had to take. What he wanted was ultimate power, the ability to truly stand at the top of the pyramid. And plunder points were the ladder for Su Ling to reach that extreme. Da. Footsteps came from a distance, pulling Su Ling's thoughts back. Several burly men emerged from a black van. They skillfully opened the back compartment, pulling out automatic rifles. Such blatant behavior showed no intention of hiding anything. As if they owned this street. One of the burly men stayed to guard the vehicle, while the others swaggered into the depths of the alley. Bang! A shoe sole stepped into a puddle of rainwater and grime, splashing dirty water everywhere. The guy with the cheap cigar frowned, muttering in U.S. English. Fool weather. He shook his pant leg, casually wiping off the water stains on the metal box in his hand, then looked towards an iron door ahead. The burly man knocked on the door, a secret signal sounding out. With a creak, the iron door was roughly pushed open a crack. Immediately after, the burly men raised their guns and entered. The warehouse interior was not large, a square room of about 40 square meters. Several pieces of pork hung in midair, and in the center was a long metal table, around which sat several grim-faced middle-aged men. They had been idly spreading out playing cards, with a small mountain of chips and neatly bundled banknotes piled on the table. Seeing the burly men burst in with guns, their movements stopped almost simultaneously. One of the men with a goatee stood up, nodded to the burly men, then walked towards the hanging frozen pork. With a flick of his wrist, he drew a dagger from his waist and, like cutting a cake, plunged it into the frozen meat with a thwack. Along the cut made by the sharp blade, packages of clear, transparent powder sewn into the meat were revealed. All the goods are here. The goatee man retracted his dagger, poked the powder with the hilt, and continued. Where's the money? The burly team leader glanced around, saw a dozen pieces of goods hanging in midair, then slightly tilted his head. A subordinate stepped forward, slapped open the box in his hand, and stacks of US dollars were exposed to the air. Here's 20 million. The warehouse manager stepped forward to confirm the amount. Once it was correct, he made a gesture. Pleasure doing business. The burly man chuckled, revealing a mouthful of yellow teeth. Pleasure doing business. Just as he waved for his subordinates to start unloading the pork, a series of urgent knocks suddenly sounded from outside. All the burly men who were moving goods instantly froze, and a dozen pairs of eyes in the warehouse simultaneously stared at the iron door. Just as he picked up the box full of US dollars, the goatee man's face darkened, and he said with some displeasure. Who the hell is knocking at this hour? The hulking leader frowned and gave a look to the younger brother guarding the door. The younger brother swallowed, slowly walked towards the iron door, and reached out to grasp the lever. Wait a moment. The warehouse manager suddenly stopped him with a shout, then called over another subordinate, pulled out a short gun with a safety catch from his body, and handed it to him, signaling for the two of them to open the door together. Open a crack and see who it is. Don't accidentally injure our own brothers. The two younger brothers exchanged glances and slowly pulled the iron door. Creak. The sound of the iron door rubbing against the ground echoed again, but this time, the door only opened a narrow slit. Just as everyone held their breath, staring at the doorway, a red box was somewhat abruptly pushed in from outside. Quote question mark. Everyone looked baffled. Who the hell shoves a box in during a transaction? The next second, a gentle voice slowly drifted in from beyond the door crack. Good evening, everyone. The goatee man was the first to react, and he questioned. Who are you? But after saying that, he regretted it a little. Because, apart from the two parties involved in the transaction, absolutely no one would come to this place. So he immediately changed to a fiercer, less confident tone and shouted. Get lost immediately, don't make me. The warehouse instantly entered a state of combat. More than a dozen guns were raised, uniformly pointing outside the door crack. If the person outside dared to step in half a pace, bullets would turn him into a sieve in the first second. Su Ling smiled and said, I have a suggestion, how about we all sit down and talk? Talk my ass. Get lost if you don't want to die. But this time, Su Ling directly raised his hand and pushed the iron door wide open with a thud. Facing more than a dozen dark gun muzzles, Su Ling was as natural as if he had entered a convenience store, even raising his hand to greet them. Hard work, everyone. Nice to meet you for the first time. No one retorted this slightly mocking greeting. Because all eyes were fixed on Su Ling's chest. Inside his jacket was a whole circle of densely packed C4 explosives wrapped around his body. And not just one, but a whole circle. Small red lights flashed with beep 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 warning lights. The hulking leader's neck stiffened, his expression instantly shifting from impatience to fear. Cold sweat even dropped to the ground with a splat. Although his finger was still on the trigger, he didn't dare to pull it. The few burly men behind him also instantly cowered, each subconsciously taking a step back. Su Ling scanned everyone's expressions, smiling even more harmlessly. Oh, don't be so nervous. He pointed to the circle of gifts on his chest. Don't worry, when this thing explodes, it's just no one alive within a 50-meter radius. After a brief silence, the warehouse manager gave the goatee man a look. The latter bit the bullet and took a step forward, saying, "Kid, we are the Skull Society. Do you know what the consequences of doing this are?" Su Ling didn't even look at him, merely turned around indifferently, and then closed the iron door. He even thoughtfully fastened all the bolts and iron locks. This way, everyone was locked inside this sealed warehouse. Seeing Su Ling do this, everyone's faces changed. Because they suddenly realized that this C4 was real. If he were merely bluffing, how could a normal person not leave themselves a way out? Where did this lunatic come from? At this moment, even the gang members who had long dealt with bloodshed felt a chilling numbness rise in their hearts. The warehouse manager's face was ashen, and he quietly moved next to the hulking man, asking in a low voice. This guy, he couldn't be an enemy of your Russian gang, could he? The hulking man glared at him and retorted. Nonsense. I don't know him at all. Isn't he an enemy of your Skull Society? The two of them argued in hushed tones, trying to pass the responsibility for this madman to the other. But no matter how low their voices were, Su Ling heard them clearly in the now silent warehouse. He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest in his eyes. Russian gang. Su Ling suddenly remembered Klaft, whom he had personally dealt with. So your Skull Society and the Russian gang are so closely related. Dragging over a rusty small iron stool, Su Ling sat down with a thud. He crossed his legs, patted the entire circle of C4 on his chest, and said unhurriedly. By the way, a reminder, this thing is controlled by my heart rate. If it exceeds 120, it's prone to exploding tilde. So many of you are pointing guns at me. I get nervous very easily. Heart rate controlled. How is there such a function? Isn't this tying all their lives to Su Ling's emotions? The goatee man's face turned pale with anger. You're joking, right? Do I look like I'm joking? As his words fell, the heart rate indicator light just happened to flash, beep beep beep, at that moment. Anyone with eyes could see it was flashing much faster than before. The warehouse manager instantly bristled and shouted. Put them down. All of you, put your guns down. More than a dozen gang members and the hulking men of the Russian mafia quickly dropped their guns to the ground. Su Ling nodded in satisfaction, his smile as gentle as if he were hosting a late-night talk show. Very good, I'm satisfied with everyone's cooperation. So, tell me, what's the worst thing you've ever done? If you can satisfy me, I'll leave on my own. Several question marks popped up above the heads of the people in front of him. Asking a gang what bad things they've done. Is this lunatic out of his mind? We're a gang, big brother, we do bad things to make a living. But no one dared to say a single, no. Because the C4 on Su Ling's chest was too dazzling. Don't say anything. Then perhaps in the next second, they'd all be meeting God. They're all just working, why be so desperate? Thus, under the coercion of the shadow of death, the goatee man was the first to speak. I robbed more than a dozen stores, and hacked 6 people to death. Then came the second, the third, everyone began to confess wildly like a machine gun, revealing the most serious evils they had committed over the years. As Su Ling listened, the smile at the corner of his mouth grew even more intense. Because above the head of every person who spoke, a virtual box slowly appeared. Conditions met. Although he didn't know the principle behind it, as long as Su Ling had the thought of, it's time for reckoning, those virtual boxes would automatically appear. It seemed the mission title, as an emissary of justice, you must strike hard, wasn't just randomly chosen. As the last gang member intermittently finished recounting his criminal history, the warehouse fell silent once again. Su Ling scanned everyone. 14 people, without exception, all had conditions met. Illuminated above their heads. It was truly a case of all villains. Su Ling glanced at the red box in his hand, a hint of disappointment flashing in his eyes. He had originally thought about exploiting a bug, but now, it was just a freebie. Standing up, he smiled and said to the few people in front of him. Excellent, you all cooperated with me wonderfully, and I'm very happy. I've had enough fun, it's time for me to go. Hearing this, everyone in the warehouse was instantly overjoyed. God, this lunatic is finally leaving. The burly man from the Russian mafia and the warehouse manager, these two minor bosses, tried hard to suppress the urge to celebrate on the spot, staring eagerly at Su Ling's departing back. Su Ling, carrying the box, opened the iron door, then suddenly turned back and said, "Will you miss me?" The brains of a dozen people in the warehouse short-circuited simultaneously. "Miss your sister. Just get lost. Please." But who would dare to say it aloud? So the goatee man was the first to nod frantically, speaking as fast as a machine gun. "Miss you. Of course, we'll miss you. We all quite like you, brother. You go first. Tomorrow morning we'll find you for a drink. How about it?" The others also nodded wildly, chiming in. Yes, yes, yes. You leave first, it's too cold here, not suitable for someone like you. A big shot to stay. The air outside is good, hurry up and go. Someone even couldn't help but step forward, wanting to clear a path for Su Ling as if seeing off an ancestor. It could be said their survival instincts were fully engaged. Looking at the somewhat excited crowd, Su Ling grinned. You really do miss me. Since we've met, I'll give you a gift. With that, Su Ling suddenly tore off the bomb from his body. Catch this, my good brothers. That circle of C4, which they regarded as the death necklace that suppressed the whole place, was thrown at their feet by Su Ling with an unbelievably casual posture. Almost at the same time, everyone in the entire warehouse had a sudden change in expression. Meanwhile, Su Ling, the instigator, pushed off with his legs and rushed forward at an extremely fast speed. Boom! A deafening explosion rang out, and the warehouse was instantly blown to pieces. The aftermath of the explosion directly sent Su Ling flying from behind, then he landed with a thud on the ground. But a few seconds later, his fingers twitched, and he sat up like a spring. Several sharp, curved iron pieces were being squeezed out from the wound on Su Ling's back. Under the effect of the horse talisman, the wound rapidly closed and healed, and even the bloodstains evaporated. The aftershock of the explosion continued. Su Ling patted the dust off himself and let out a cold laugh. A bunch of idiots. He pulled a small remote controller from his pocket and dangled it in the night wind. This was the real switch. A heart rate controlled bomb, how could that even be possible? I'm not Tony Stark. Casually tossing the remote control aside, Su Ling's ears were filled with a series of mechanical sounds. Mission content. Kill 30 heinous villains, 4/30ths. Mission content. Mission content. Kill 30 heinous villains, 29/30ths. This string of values shot up in the blink of an eye. Looking at the flickering numbers in front of him, the curve of Su Ling's lips involuntarily turned upward. Just one more. Without delay, Su Ling quickly walked in the direction he remembered. He clearly remembered that there was still a Russian burly man guarding the car over there. As long as he took out that guy and completed the mission, the plunder points would be immediately at hand. However, just as he was about to step out of the alley, a dark figure descended from the sky, blocking his path. Su Ling had just looked up when he saw that the dark figure was carrying a corpse in his right hand, twisted into a bizarre posture. It was precisely the Russian burly man guarding the car he was about to look for. The corpse was covered in wounds, and even its bones were broken at strange angles. Clearly, those were not injuries caused by the explosion, but rather marks left by pure physical torture. What's going on? Using the faint light of the street lamp, Su Ling finally saw the appearance of the dark figure. A high-nose bridge, and the contours of his face hidden in shadow looked extremely imposing. Under his black tight-fitting short-sleeved shirt were bulging muscles, and his chest was covered with a heavy bulletproof tactical vest, on which a huge skull was printed. Seeing this iconic attire, Su Ling almost instantly recognized the identity of the person in front of him. Frank Castle. Codename, The Punisher. As a man who came from the elite Marine Corps, Frank had participated in countless secret operations, and on the battlefield, he was even known as the Undying Ghost. He was not only an experienced unconventional warfare expert but also a monster proficient in tactics, firearms, demolitions, and various other skills. But Frank's family was caught in a gang shootout and all died tragically in the street. After that day, Frank completely darkened, becoming a dark war god who fought violence with violence, beginning his revenge against all evil forces. Although he had no superpowers, Frank's combat power was so strong that even superpowered individuals had to treat him cautiously. It's no exaggeration to say that in America, where crime runs rampant, this fierce man could be called the terror instructor of the underworld. According to the memories in Su Ling's mind, Frank and Wade's modus operandi were very similar. It's just that Wade liked to say provocative things, while Frank was more direct. He never wasted a second. Although Frank was a famous anti-hero in Marvel, Su Ling's impression of him had never been bad. At least this guy had principles when killing, only targeting truly wicked criminals. Just as Su Ling was thinking about how to explain to Frank, the big man opposite spoke first. "Boy, you're in danger, aren't you?" Su Ling. Accompanied by pattering footsteps, the huge figure completely emerged from the shadows. The 6'3" tough guy looked down at Su Ling and continued. "Don't be afraid. Just tell me what happened in the warehouse. Where are those bad guys?" All right, Su Ling completely understood. The Punisher had mistaken him for a poor soul oppressed by the gang and at his wits' end. Su Ling shrugged helplessly and said, "As you can see, I blew that place up." The words had barely left his lips. A huge question mark instantly appeared on Frank's iron-like face. In fact, he had only just arrived here not long ago. After catching a live member of the Russian mafia by the car, Frank subjected him to a round of standard, Punisher-style questioning, before finally pinpointing the warehouse's location. In his understanding, that warehouse was a handover point for the Skull Society and the Russian gang, with firepower and numbers above the standard line. To blow that place sky high would require at least a squad carrying heavy firepower, or the kind of abnormal individuals he knew. So Frank immediately decided to lie in wait nearby, preparing to pick off those fools one by one once they were alone. Who knew that after waiting for a long time, what greeted him was an inexplicable explosion, and an Asian teenager walking out of the alley. A teenager who looked less than 20 years old, without even a single wound on his body. The contrast was way too huge. Frank stared at Su Ling for a full 3 seconds. His gaze contained confusion, doubt, judgment, and a complex emotion of, am I being played? But in the end, he didn't detect any hint of a lie from Su Ling. The young man was too calm, so calm that his expression didn't seem to belong to someone his age. Frank suppressed the questions in his mind and asked, "Who are you?" Su Ling shook the red box in his hand, a mischievous smile appearing on his face. "You can call me Captain Box." The night wind howled through the alley entrance, scattering the paper on the ground, but Frank himself seemed to have frozen. He stared at Su Ling, his eyebrows furrowing into a Chuan character. "That name, are you serious? You're Captain America's relative, right?" But despite his speechlessness, Frank wasn't the type to mock people until they lost their temper like Wade. He merely put away the dagger in his cuff, ready to be thrown at any moment, and relaxed. Because from experience, Frank could determine one thing. This young man was not a bad person. Frank didn't speak again. He simply, as usual, threw the trash in his hand to the other side of the alley. Then, Frank turned and walked away, preparing to leave. But after just 3 steps, he suddenly stopped. Su Ling followed Frank's gaze, and his eyelids couldn't help but twitch. Because in the distance, a whole line of jeeps appeared. Roughly estimated, there were at least 15 or more vehicles. Screech. The sound of tires rubbing against the ground came, and the car doors were pulled open almost simultaneously. One after another, fully armed strong men rushed out of the jeeps. In just 5 seconds, all the exits of the alley were completely blocked. Although Frank didn't know what exactly happened in the warehouse, one thing he was 100% certain of was, these fully armed madmen must have been attracted by the Asian young man in front of him. And he himself was innocently implicated. "Hurry!" Frank roared, without hesitation, and rushed towards another dark, narrow alley. Su Ling also followed closely. Even with the horse talisman, so many armed forces were not something he could take on alone. The two figures moved quickly through the alley. Behind them, the sound of footsteps grew louder. Like a pack of mad dogs sniffing out blood, completely enraged by the scent of gore, they swarmed forward. Just then, Frank, who was running in front, suddenly stopped. His right hand reached for his waist with extreme speed. Whoosh! The pistol was drawn. A standard shooting stance was immediately adopted. Several blurry figures jumped out of the shadows ahead, their dark gun muzzles pointed at the two of them. However, all their movements were anticipated by Frank. Bang! 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 Frank's personally modified automatic pistol erupted with terrifying muzzle flash, flying from the barrel. 3 bullets accurately pierced through 3 heads, and blood mist exploded into dark red flowers in the air. But the danger was not over. The firepower from behind surged. Dozens of gang thugs rushed into the alley with automatic rifles, and the flashing gunfire illuminated the dim night like day. This way. Frank grabbed Su Ling's collar, and the two simultaneously pressed into the recessed cover along the walls. Bullets wildly sprayed, and sparks flew from the metal corners of the walls. Su Ling glanced through the gap in the cover, his face turning green. There are too many people. Didn't I just blow up a few of your core figures? But the worst was yet to come, as hurried footsteps also came from the corners at the rear and front of the alley. Su Ling and Frank were surrounded. Frank cursed in a low voice, then pulled out 2 round metal canisters from his side pocket and said to Su Ling, "I'll throw smoke grenades, and we'll break through in the chaos." Before he could finish speaking, Su Ling suddenly reached out and stopped Frank's action. "There's no time. Give me the grenades." Frank was stunned. "Brother, in this situation, shouldn't we be confusing their vision and retreating while we have the chance? What the heck do you want grenades for? And in such a confined space, are you planning to die with the enemy?" He subconsciously wanted to refuse, but in the firelight, he saw Su Ling's calm and resolute eyes. Frank hesitated for half a second. Finally, he moved his hand from the smoke grenades to the grenades, took them out, and put them into Su Ling's hand. "What are you going to do? Tell me your plan." Su Ling grinned. "It's simple, blow them up." Frank's pupils suddenly contracted. The next second, Su Ling simultaneously pulled the pins from both grenades. Fa Yard Ahong. The grenades, like 2 afterimages, were swung by Su Ling in wide arcs towards the front and rear directions of the alley. Boom! Boom! 2 terrifying explosions erupted simultaneously. The alley seemed to have been violently struck by a giant fist, and walls and rubble were all flung into the sky. At such close range, Su Ling and Frank were both directly lifted off the ground. The entire world was blasted into a blank in their ears, all sensations stacking up in just 1 second. As Su Ling tumbled in midair, that familiar and long unheard mechanical prompt clearly sounded in his ear. Mission content. Kill 30 heinous villains, 30/30ths. Mission complete. Plunder points +1. Do you want to use plunder points? Yes, no. The explosion's firelight illuminated the virtual box, and Su Ling grinned in midair, choosing the yes option with almost no hesitation. Buzz. Su Ling only felt his vision instantly swallowed by a light curtain. This time, the plunder was not slow like the first time, instead, it was astonishingly fast. 5 seconds, it took less than 5 seconds. Beep. The light curtain then trembled, and lines of dazzling large characters floated out. Plunder successful. Plunder Source World. Jackie Chan Adventures World. Plunder Target. 12 Talismans, Rabbit Talisman. Su Ling's sea of consciousness suddenly vibrated, and an ancient yet spiritual talisman slowly emerged from the void. The talisman glowed with a gentle yet captivating white spiritual light, and carved in its center was a rabbit with a light posture, as if ready to leap out at any moment. It quietly landed next to the horse talisman. The 2 talismans, one on the left and one on the right, completely merged with Su Ling. And Su Ling, who was falling in midair due to the explosion, suddenly felt something activate. Whoosh! That was the sound of air being torn apart. Su Ling, as if by magic, leapt directly from the air to the ground. Looking down at his feet, a glimmer of excitement flashed in his eyes. Is this the power of the rabbit talisman? The power of speed surged through his body like blood, a feeling so light that he felt he could leave the entire city behind in the next second. I bet correctly after all. After landing, Su Ling raised his hand and patted the dust off himself. Although his heart was still beating wildly from that momentary leap. Besides the excitement, there was also a slight sense of relief at having survived a close call. One must know, his system, Myriad Worlds Plunder, does not have the function to acquire specific abilities. It won't ask you what you want, nor will it consider your current situation, much less thoughtfully pick what you need most. It could be said that his system is completely random. Although the current world is Jackie Chan Adventures World, and the plundering target will most likely be drawn from the 12 talismans. But as a transmigrator, Su Ling knew very well that among these 12 talismans, there were still quite a few that were rather useless. Yes, I'm talking about you, Sheep Talisman. So Su Ling's action was actually very bold and extreme. Of course, Su Ling, who was cautious by nature, still had other methods. For example, enduring it with the heaven-defying ability of the Horse Talisman. Fortunately, that last resort wasn't needed. Su Ling, having drawn the Rabbit Talisman, was now extremely fast, even able to observe bullets as if they were stationary objects. Adjusting his breathing, Su Ling couldn't suppress the smile at the corner of his mouth. He looked at Frank, who had just fallen from midair to the ground. The show is about to begin. Parallel time and space, Jackie Chan Adventures World. Inside a large aquarium somewhere. A giant sea turtle lay on the shore, its shell shimmering under the lights. At this moment, Jackie Chan was squatting beside it, his eyes fixed on the talisman embedded in the turtle's carapace, his face full of joy. It really is the Rabbit Talisman. He hadn't quite believed it when Jade said she saw a talisman on TV. Now that he saw it with his own eyes, he had to retrieve it quickly. In the distance, near the aquarium's viewing platform, Jade leaned against the railing with her arms crossed, her small face devoid of any joy, her brows tightly furrowed. Even though the extremely important Rabbit Talisman was right before her, her attention wasn't on it at all. Jade's mind kept replaying the wisp of white light that had appeared in the temple a few days ago. It was that strange light that had stolen the Horse Talisman from her Uncle Long's hands. Although she and Jackie Chan later went to Section 13 and found Captain Black, all the clues were still cut off. According to their later encounter with the gang, those guys also didn't seem to have gotten the Horse Talisman that could heal everything. How strange. Is there really some magic that can steal a talisman without touching it? Jade shook her head, shaking these strange thoughts out of her mind, and looked up at Jackie Chan, who was about to roll up his sleeves and pry the talisman off the turtle's shell. But just then, that familiar and dazzling white light burst forth from the turtle's shell again. Uncle Long. Quick. Stop it. Jade shouted from above. Jackie Chan reacted quickly, pushing off with his legs and throwing himself onto the turtle's shell, pressing it down firmly. But the white light still passed through his body unimpeded. As if all obstacles in reality did not exist before this light. Ouch. Jackie Chan only felt a warm current surge through his abdomen. It felt exactly like a small sun being pressed against his skin, except without the pain. Just like before, the white light came quickly and left quickly. Jackie Chan, his vision restored, subconsciously looked at the turtle's back shell, but he froze in place. The Rabbit Talisman was gone. How is that possible? Jackie Chan's pupils contracted uncontrollably. I had it pinned down. Why is it gone again? What's going on? Clearly, this strange and terrifying power had once again directly taken the talisman from this world. Sent it to a certain place, into someone's hands. Marvel Universe. The other end of the alley. The aftermath of the explosion still echoed, the air filled with the pungent smell of gunpowder and blood. Frank was blown horizontally from the sky, now slamming into the ground like a broken sack, rolling 3 or 4 times before stopping. He couldn't even prop himself up on his elbows, collapsing to the ground, his internal organs constantly aching. Cough. A sweet taste in his mouth, a mouthful of fresh blood directly sprayed onto the ground. Frank squinted, breathing with difficulty. If it weren't for years of fighting violence with violence, training his body like an ox. The explosion of those 2 grenades would have been enough to send him to meet God. I must be crazy, how could I listen to that brat? Frank's chest heaved violently, regret and pain mixed together. But what was done, and the sound of approaching footsteps made Frank try to straighten himself up. The gang's pursuers were here. There were too many of them. Even though Su Ling threw 2 grenades, it only resolved the immediate crisis. In this state, I can't fight anymore. That, Captain Box, must have been blown to smithereens. I really should have stopped him from doing something so crazy. Despite saying this, a hint of regret flashed through Frank's heart. That Asian boy, he was quite like him when he was young. The ruthlessness in his eyes, the decisiveness in his actions, the stubbornness of charging forward relentlessly, that was an aura only possessed by those who had experienced despair. What a pity. His grenades were specially modified. Such a huge explosion would have cost even Frank half his life, let alone a child who looked to be under 20. But now was not the time for regret. The footsteps of the gang pursuers were rapidly approaching, and he had to leave immediately. Propping up his nearly falling apart body with sheer will, Frank's right hand reached for the last smoke bomb fastened to the side of his tactical vest. This thing was his last chance to save his life. As long as he threw it, under the cover of the smoke, he might be able to escape this alley and avoid this pursuit. With a flick of his wrist, Frank was just about to throw the smoke bomb. Suddenly, a dull thud came from the direction of the alley entrance. It was clearly the loud sound of a heavy object impacting at high speed. Frank quickly looked up. The next second, he froze in place. He saw a deep indentation on the wall at the corner of the alley entrance. And in that indentation were one disfigured gang member after another. Under the dim streetlights, that person lightly shook his wrist and said faintly, "Oh, why are they so fragile?" That voice, Frank was all too familiar with it. "You're awake, Mr. Frank." Su Ling stood there, a trace of white marks from super high-speed friction still around his feet. "Are you ready to leave?" Leave. Frank's mind had crashed. He couldn't describe what he was seeing with words. Su Ling slowly turned his head, looking at the constantly approaching gang members, and smiled. "Let me take you to experience what it feels like to fly." Frank stared at Su Ling's face, which held a relaxed smile, his head filled with enough question marks to fill the entire sky. Fly. Fly where? This alley was blocked like an iron barrel by the gang. Whose private helicopter do you want me to take? Even more ridiculous, even if there was a helicopter hovering above them, they couldn't get on. Also, that gang member half embedded in the wall, his posture looked exactly like he'd been hit by something at high speed. And why did this Asian juvenile look perfectly fine? Just now, he was blown into the sky by an explosion right before his eyes. A barrage of questions rattled in Frank's head like a machine gun. The Punisher, known for his composure, was completely frozen, staring blankly as Su Ling walked towards him step by step. Su Ling finally stopped. He raised his right hand and casually shook it. Click. Pop. The sound was as crisp as crunchy noodles. Frank's eyes widened sharply. Because he clearly saw that a second ago, that right hand was a bloody mess, even the white bones inside were visible to him. But in the blink of an eye, it had returned to a perfectly intact palm. What the hell? Frank even forgot the pain in his body. He had been in the underground world for so many years, what kind of monsters hadn't he seen? Mutants, assassins, enhanced soldiers, but someone like Su Ling, who was thrown into the sky by an explosion, had broken bones heal instantly, and still had a relaxed smile on his face, he had truly never seen before. Moreover, this juvenile didn't seem like a psychologically twisted mutant at all. Su Ling looked at Frank's expression, chuckled lightly, but offered no explanation. As Frank had seen, that was his test just now. The extreme speed granted by the rabbit talisman was like fast-forwarding time at n-times speed. Relying on speed beyond common sense, he charged into the gang's formation like a bullet, slamming them one by one into the walls. This insane fighting style naturally tore Su Ling's body into shredded meat due to the interaction of forces. But don't forget, he was the man who possessed the horse talisman. Such an incredible recovery ability almost instantly restored Su Ling to his original state. One offense, one defense. It was practically a perpetual motion machine. Su Ling withdrew his gaze, the mixed light of excitement and killing intent fading from his eyes. He looked at Frank, who was pale but still alert, and asked, "Can you still walk, Mr. Frank?" The Punisher seemed to take several seconds to drag his soul back from shock, then nodded. Then, let's go. However, this sentence made Frank pause. Go. He remembered the terrifying line from earlier. Let me show you what it feels like to fly. Frank couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Fly? What does that mean? Have your reinforcements arrived? After all, a juvenile who could blow up a warehouse and still be alive and kicking. Theoretically, he might also summon some powerful figure from the sky, like a flying mutant. But Su Ling just shook his head gently. No reinforcements, just me. He turned his back to Frank. Put your hand on my shoulder. Frank. That sounded a bit strange. But even stranger was the sense of unconscious trust in Su Ling's tone, which made Frank, as if by some ghostly impulse, raise his hand and place it on the Asian juvenile's shoulder. But as soon as he put it on, Frank regretted it. His sixth sense was exploding wildly. But Su Ling no longer gave him a chance to regret. Hold on tight, my first passenger. The moment that sentence fell. Boom. The explosive sound of air being torn apart erupted throughout the alley. Frank felt as if his world was left with only the sound of the wind and the rapidly receding streetscape around him. He was dragged by Su Ling, rushing into the depths of the night at a speed far exceeding that of a bullet. Meanwhile, at the exit of the alley, Thomas stood on the roof of the foremost car, hands tightly gripping the railing, his face terribly grim. Even on such a cold Brooklyn night, it couldn't hide the rage in his chest. A bunch of useless trash. Thomas kicked the car roof fiercely, leaving a dent in the steel plate. Nearly 100 armed elites, all hand-picked gunmen from the Skull Society, couldn't even catch a fool who blew up a warehouse. As a high-ranking member of the Skull Society, he knew very well that this warehouse was one of the Skull Society's most important cash cows. Countless shipments had flowed from here into America over the years, without a single mishap. The cooperation with the Russians was as stable as could be, everyone in the Skull Society knew. As long as Thomas is in charge of the warehouse, there will never be a problem with the goods. Undoubtedly, this was Thomas's trademark. It was also his capital to become my Lord Wilson's right-hand man. But precisely tonight, the transaction site he was responsible for was blown to hell. But as long as he could catch that fool, he still had hope of survival. But if he returned empty-handed, Thomas merely imagined the consequences, and a chill ran down the back of his neck. Who dares to touch my, Thomas's, goods? His subordinates stood trembling beside the car, not daring to breathe. Just then, a subordinate holding a rifle shouted. Mr. Though Thomas. There's movement over there. Did you catch him? Get out of my way. Kicking aside the subordinate who blocked his view, Thomas looked up ahead. Then, he froze. What the hell is that? At the end of his vision, a black figure was rushing directly towards them at a speed that completely defied the laws of physics. Thomas's scalp tingled, and he shouted. Where did that monster come from? Open fire. Ta-ta-ta. Dozens of gang members simultaneously raised their gun barrels, and strings of fire spewed from the dark muzzles. Bullets poured out like a rainstorm, illuminating the entire street as bright as day. But under such a fierce assault, the black figure showed no signs of stopping, instead rushing faster and faster. Almost in the blink of an eye, the black figure appeared within the Jeep's headlights, completely exposed to everyone's view. Thomas saw two images. One was an expressionless Asian juvenile. The other was the Punisher Frank, who had one hand on the juvenile's shoulder and seemed to be a bit carsick. Wah! Thomas hadn't even finished his curse. Su Ling glanced at him, a dangerously curved smile playing on his lips. Good luck, another gift. Whoosh! The figure flashed past. Thomas only felt an emptiness in his chest, and an indescribable pain exploded from within. He looked down. A fist-sized blood hole had appeared there at some point, continuously gushing blood. What's happening? Thomas twisted his head with difficulty, and what met his eyes was Su Ling's blood-soaked right hand. Thud. The moment this Skull Society executive fell, there was a series of metallic clanging sounds on the ground. Dozens of grenades were thrown from Su Ling's hand. Those were the spoils he had, casually, picked up. Each one was engraved with the Skull Society's unique emblem. Good night, New York. Good night, the Skull Society. The next second, Boom, boom, boom. Successive explosions ripped through the night sky, and the street was rapidly engulfed in flames. Meanwhile, Su Ling, with Frank, quickly rushed in a certain direction. 2 hours later, inside a secluded shack, Frank stood in front of the bathroom mirror, skillfully bandaging the wounds on his body. He had done these procedures countless times, but today, every step felt especially unreal. Halfway through wrapping the gauze, he suddenly looked up at his reflection in the mirror. Slap. Frank raised his hand and slapped his own face. Slap. He slapped it again. However, the man in the mirror was still the Punisher, pale-faced and filled with life-questioning shock. He didn't wake up. This means everything he experienced today was not a dream. The intense explosions, the speed faster than bullets, the recovery of bone injuries, these scenes continuously replayed in his mind like a revolving lantern. Frank took a deep breath and muttered to himself. Calm down, calm down. But even so, he couldn't force himself to calm down. What happened tonight would be enough to make any psychiatrist prescribe 3 bottles of medication. After getting dressed, Frank, moving like a poorly assembled machine, walked from the bathroom to the living room. Creak. The wooden floor let out a sound. Looking up, he saw the culprit who had driven him to the brink of insanity tonight. Su Ling was sitting in the slightly sunken old sofa, one leg crossed, holding the last can of Coke from his refrigerator. It was as if this wasn't his hideout, but the guy's living room. Frank's mouth twitched. He really didn't know what to say. Fortunately, Su Ling spoke first, breaking the silence. Mr. Frank, how are you feeling? Frank walked over and sat on the sofa opposite Su Ling, gripping the wrapped bandage, and replied expressionlessly. If you hadn't dragged me around those alleyways so many times, I'd probably be feeling a bit better right now. Although the big guy's tone was calm, the suppressed frustration and helplessness were practically overflowing the room. Su Ling chuckled, completely unashamed, and didn't deny his utterly bizarre actions. I can't help it. I'm the type who feels compelled to clean up bad guys whenever I see them. He pointed to himself. Doesn't that give off enthusiastic citizen vibes? Enthusiastic my foot. The dark lines on Frank's face were practically solidifying. Su Ling chugged the Coke down and continued. Besides, I wasn't just running around randomly when I took you in circles. After all, I accepted a commission, and I'd be embarrassed to go back without finishing it. Frank's pupils contracted. Only now did he realize a terrifying fact. Tonight's seemingly chaotic escape route with Su Ling was entirely this kid, doing side quests. Even worse, he, the Punisher, famous throughout the underground world, had become a backdrop for a 20-year-old youth. Rubbing his brow, Frank felt his mental endurance being pushed step by step to its limit by Su Ling. Forget it. He couldn't be bothered to correct Su Ling's nonsensical logic anymore. I need to tell you something. You're in big trouble. Su Ling instinctively straightened up and asked. What happened? Frank glanced at him, considered his words carefully, and finally told him the truth. The entire Russian gang is looking for you right now. They quickly posted an extremely high bounty on the dark web, roughly $30 million. To clarify, that's just the price for your head. You can get a decent reward for other body parts as well. Su Ling. Are you serious, buddy? He worked so hard on commissions only to earn a small amount of money. The gang puts out 30 million. And you can even claim rewards for parts of the body. Plus, this efficiency is insane. It's only been a few hours since that explosion, right? Su Ling frowned, thought seriously for a moment, and asked. Wait, this is related to the Russian gang too. Wasn't the Skull Society the main event tonight? Frank lit a cigar, put it in his mouth, and replied. The guy you killed last was named Thomas. He was the younger brother of Kaylee, the boss of the Russian gang. Pausing, Frank continued to elaborate. That's why the Skull Society and the Russian Mafia are so close. Also, you blew up the Skull Society's most important transaction warehouse like that. This bounty was clearly issued by both major gangs together. Hearing this, Su Ling was silent for a few seconds, his calm expression earning Frank's admiration. A moment later, Su Ling asked. Then why weren't you put up for a bounty? This time, the muscular man rarely curled his lip, it was the cold sneer of the Punisher. Who in this city do you think has the ability to take my head? Frank pointed to the various weapons scattered around the room, all high-powered killing tools he had personally modified. Gangs, mercenaries, drug dealers. I've killed countless numbers of them. In their files, I'm no longer a target, but an entity they must stay away from. He withdrew his finger and looked at Su Ling. Besides, they are very clear about my capabilities. It's impossible for me to do so many incredible things single-handedly. So, with various coincidences converging, you look more like the mastermind behind tonight's explosion. Welcome to the dark web wanted list, Captain Box. Hearing this, Su Ling shrugged nonchalantly. A bounty is a bounty. If anyone dares to mess with me, I'll just kill them in return. If this were before, he might have been worried. But now, unless those guys from the Marvel Universe come after him, he really has nothing to fear. Besides, with the rabbit talisman, if he can't beat them, can't he run away? But soon, Su Ling realized a crucial issue and asked, raising an eyebrow. So, according to you, the Skull Society has been completely destroyed by my explosion. Hearing this, Frank let out a light laugh. The laugh carried mockery, exhaustion, and the helplessness of, I don't know where you get this confidence. Kid, this world is much more complex than you think. He raised his head, his gaze sinking. Standing behind the Skull Society is Kingpin, the demon who controls the New York underground forces. Did you think the Skull Society could openly conduct transactions in Brooklyn purely on their own? Su Ling was stunned. Kingpin. That supervillain from the Marvel Universe. Doesn't that mean Spider-Man and Daredevil exist in this city? But wait. Tony hasn't announced himself as Iron Man yet. Suddenly, a current flashed through Su Ling's mind. A terrifying yet bold idea surfaced in his heart. Could it be that the Marvel world he is in is a Marvel with an unconventional timeline? It might even be a merged Marvel world. Doesn't that mean those terrifying crises could descend at any moment? Seeing Su Ling remain silent, Frank seemed to find a way to vent and continued. Guess why the bounty was posted under the name of the Russian gang? The Skull Society's leader is dead, the warehouse is gone, and the fieldwork and elite squads were all wiped out by you. That guy, Kingpin, couldn't even be bothered to ask a single question. Because, you aren't even worth Kingpin's attention. After hearing this, Su Ling merely chuckled and said nothing. In fact, he hadn't taken the contempt of Kingpin, this underground world boss, to heart at all. All Su Ling could think about right now was whether this world was truly the Marvel Universe he was familiar with. Seeing his reaction, Frank couldn't say anything, only puffing on his cigarette. At the same time, he was reflecting on whether his words just now had been too harsh, scaring the Asian youth. Su Ling stood up and walked to the window. Outside the window, the horizon was turning a pale white. The first ray of sunlight pierced through the haze, signaling the start of a new day. Gangs, dark web bounties, the Punisher, the various events unfolding before him all pointed to one answer for Su Ling. This was indeed the Marvel Universe, and it was just as dangerous as he remembered. But it seemed to deviate slightly from the original. I need to get stronger quickly. This thought once again filled Su Ling's mind, leaving him unable to calm down for a long time. After a moment, he suppressed the chaotic thoughts and turned around. Frank was sitting on the worn military sofa, seemingly lost in thought. Su Ling looked at him and suddenly spoke seriously. Mr. Frank, I need to buy some of your weapons. New York, Queens. Inside a hidden underground room, the tin door creaked open. A refined man in a black suit walked in, wearing a standardized professional smile. Facing the fully armed Russian strongmen, he simply ignored them and walked straight inside, stopping before a round table. On it lay a charred corpse. Compared to the corpse's general appearance, the fist-sized hole in its chest was even more jarring. Pushing up the gold-rimmed glasses on his nose, the refined man spoke to the somewhat stunned man across from him. Mr. Cayley, regarding everything that happened to your brother Thomas, Mr. Kingpin asked me to express his. He didn't finish his sentence. Click. A pistol was pressed directly against the back of his head. Cayley's eyes were bloodshot. Russians were naturally large, and fueled by anger, he now looked exactly like an enraged brown bear. This is Kingpin's attitude. Is that right, Han? Sending an assistant to brush me off. Is this an insult to our Russian gang? Whoosh. The other Russian strong men in the room raised their rifles and aimed them at the man named Han. However, despite the tense atmosphere, Han still wore that faint smile, his breathing not disturbed in the slightest. He looked at Kaylee, a hint of disgust flashing in his eyes, and then spoke. Mr. Kaylee, you misunderstand. If Mr. Kingpin wanted to insult you, you wouldn't be standing here right now. You'd be lying next to your brother. Hearing this, the Russian strong man's veins bulged with fury. He rushed up to Han in a few strides, poked the expensive suit with his finger, and said viciously. Go back and tell Kingpin to come talk to me himself. This matter will not be settled just like this. Clearly, Han did not want to argue with him, or rather, disdained arguing with him. He casually pulled out a stool from under the round table and sat down. He crossed his legs and spoke slowly. Mr. Kaylee. You should learn to control your anger. Mr. Kingpin does not like people who are ruled by their emotions. Without giving Kaylee a chance to flare up again, Han continued. Regarding the two attackers who blew up the warehouse, Mr. Kingpin has sent people to investigate. And the identities of those two attackers have been locked down. Kaylee's pupils involuntarily constricted, but he didn't say a word. He knew very well that these Americans wouldn't provide information for no reason, much less give you answers for free. Such precious information must be accompanied by an equivalent exchange, or even outright plunder. Before Kaylee could process it, Han's voice rang out again. Mr. Kingpin has issued a bounty in the name of your Russian gang. Furthermore, he believes that your Russian gang is no longer competent enough for the work at hand. Silence. A deathly silence. Kaylee's entire face froze completely. No longer competent. What did that mean? Could it be? Han seemed to see through his shock, his tone still terrifyingly gentle. Mr. Kaylee, you seem not to understand my meaning. The meaning of, no longer competent, is that, starting now, your territories, your channels, your warehouses, and your partnership with the Skull Society will all be assisted by Mr. Kingpin. Of course Kaylee understood. Assist. Assist my ass. He wished he could tear the word apart right there. Kaylee's face was slightly contorted with rage. He knew very well that although his brother Thomas worked for Kingpin, having been in America for so many years, Thomas also controlled the Russian gang's own gray network besides the work Kingpin assigned. Vast cargo channels, several intercity routes, hidden storage points, that was an astonishingly valuable piece of fat meat. After Thomas's death, this piece of fat meat should have been reclaimed by Kaylee himself. That was their ethnic group's territory, the influence they had fought for with blood. But now, Han's words clearly meant he wanted to take over Thomas's work. How was that any different from savagely carving a huge chunk of meat out of the Russian mafia? And most importantly, the box was currently missing. Inside it was the most vital thing belonging to the entire Russian gang. No matter what, he had to get it back, and at any cost. Therefore, Kaylee absolutely could not accept what Han was saying, and he shouted. Thomas's business belongs to our Russian gang. Why should Kingpin take it over? Han raised his eyes and smiled slightly. Because your brother is dead. Kaylee immediately drew the pistol from his waist. He was going to take care of this fool. But Han showed no signs of stopping. I'll just tell you directly. One of those two attackers is the man known as the Punisher. And the other one is a mutant. Mr. Kaylee, tell me, do you still believe you are capable of handling this now? However, rage had completely burned Kaylee's reason to ashes, and he roared. To hell with assistance. He pressed the muzzle against Han's forehead, his finger resting on the trigger. Get the hell out. Go back and tell Kingpin, that fat pig, that this is I am possible. Don't think you can threaten me with those two attackers. I don't need Kingpin's help to find them and personally deal with those scoundrels. Thump thump. A knock sounded. Han didn't go in immediately. Instead, he raised a hand to straighten his cuff before pushing open the office door. He looked at the giant figure nearly 2 meters tall in the center of the room, bowed slightly, and respectfully said. As you expected, Kaylee did not agree. The man clasped his 10 fingers together and slowly turned around. Under the light, a face as gentle as a philanthropist's was revealed. Wilson Fisk, nicknamed Kingpin. The creator of New York's underground empire. A philanthropic giant by day, a crime lord by night. He slowly said. Of course, he wouldn't agree. Because Kaylee's anger is much bigger than his brain. Heian lowered his eyes, not daring to say more. Kingpin walked to the window, overlooking New York below, and continued. Anger is also a human desire. As long as there is desire, there will be weaknesses. He looked at Heian, revealing an extremely oppressive smile. Kaylee will sooner or later beg me to lend him a hand. We just need to wait quietly. Kingpin came from a gang family. As a child, he suffered abuse from his father, and his scarred childhood made Kingpin even more desirous of the power to kill and take. From then on, he harbored the ambition to build his own underworld empire, and for this, he put in efforts unimaginable to ordinary people. As Kingpin's confidant, Heian knew these things too well. The empire built by this man before him was accumulated little by little from a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The bodies of those who dared to question him, challenge him, or betray him had long been fed to the fish in the Hudson River. Therefore, Heian had absolute trust in Kingpin's judgment. A moment later, Heian collected his thoughts and brought the conversation back on track. Mr. Kingpin, regarding the two people who destroyed the warehouse, we have confirmed one of them, the Punisher Frank Castle. As for the other, Heian's face showed a strange expression. That Asian man is a bit strange. Kingpin finally turned around, unconsciously stroking the cufflink on his right hand, signaling him to continue. According to the last record uploaded by several surrounding electronic eyes, that guy seemed to be carrying the Punisher, flying. The air in the office was silent for 2 seconds. For the first time, Kingpin's facial muscles twitched visibly. Flying. Yes. Heian nodded and continued. And without the aid of any device. He was moving on the ground at an extremely high speed, carrying the Punisher. So fast it was like he was gliding on the ground. Kingpin. For the first time, he showed genuine surprise. You mean, an Asian man under 20? Carrying a muscular strongman covered in tactical gear. Flying on the ground. Heian remained silent and nodded again. The office was utterly silent. The next second, Kingpin suddenly let out a low laugh, the sound revealing a hint of excitement. How interesting. New York, it seems, has another monster worthy of my personal attention. Heian, issue another bounty. This time, not just the dark web, but the entire city must move. Kingpin looked at the bustling streets below, the pathological intensity in his eyes growing stronger. I want to see that kid's head on my desk as soon as possible. If he couldn't have it, he'd destroy it. This had been his most common and favorite method for many years. The lights of the mercenary bar were as dim as ever. In a corner of the bar, Su Ling tapped the table twice and said, "1 sugar-free cola." Weasel was wiping glasses. Hearing the familiar voice, he couldn't help but yawn tiredly, barely bothering to lift his eyelids. Brother, it's only 9 in the morning. Why aren't you home sleeping? Is this your living room or something? Su Ling chuckled, just about to say something, when he saw Weasel lean his old face closer. I say, you're famous now. Huh. Can drinking cola make you famous? Weasel didn't waste words, simply pulling out a black metal card from under the bar. This black card was much more exquisite than the one Su Ling had seen before. Sliding the card across the bar to Su Ling, Weasel continued. Look, this is a $15 million commission. Even I'm tempted. Su Ling was stunned by Weasel's words. He picked up the card, and black lines instantly appeared on his face. Because the content on this card, no matter how he looked at it, was related to himself. Kill the Asian man appearing next to the Punisher. Reward, $15 million. I don't understand what you mean. What does this have to do with me? There are so many Asian people in America, I'm not the only one. Listening to Su Ling's rebuttal, Weasel couldn't bear to expose him. He casually tossed a document onto the bar in front of him. This photo has spread throughout New York's underground black market. They don't know, but don't I know, Captain Box. Su Ling opened it, and a photo came into view. Although his face was blurry, the Punisher's face was very clear. Most importantly, the red box under the Jeep's light was particularly dazzling. I miscalculated. I should have dyed the box yellow. No. Didn't they say the bounty was on the dark web? How did it get to the mercenary bar? What the hell is going on? Weasel looked at Su Ling's expression, as if he had eaten something disgusting, and a look of amusement reappeared on his face. An S-rank bounty hasn't appeared in almost 10 years. What does that mean? He held up a finger and wiggled it in front of Su Ling. It means the entire New York, the entire underground network, is looking for you. I heard mutants have been dispatched too. Hearing this, Su Ling felt his scalp tingle. If there weren't only the two of them in the bar right now, he would really want to use the rabbit talisman to teleport away from this dangerous place immediately. Who wants me dead so thoroughly? Su Ling didn't doubt Weasel's words. Although this guy was cunning, he was certainly not an idiot who would play such a malicious trick with something like this. His intelligence system was top tier in New York's underground circles. Weasel patted his shoulder and softly said, "Don't worry, it'll still take them a long time to find you. I have a house in Mexico. How about you, go there to lay low for a bit." In his perception, Su Ling was indeed quite special. But that was only limited to dealing with some gang members. To issue such a large-scale bounty with such a high reward, the power behind it was undoubtedly terrifying. The current Su Ling had absolutely no ability to resist. So, Weasel felt there was nothing wrong with his suggestion. Running away was the best option. Just as Su Ling was pondering his next move, a familiar mechanical voice suddenly buzzed in his ear. Ding! As before, the blue virtual frame instantly unfolded. Mission name: Fight, Awesome. Mission content: assist a superhero to kill a supervillain, 0/1. Mission reward: plunder points *1. Su Ling was completely stunned. But the striking mission content before his eyes was real. But the problem was, this pace was way too fast. Previous missions were all in the realm of mortals, like criminals and villains. But this time, the target was directly aimed at the villain faction. In the Marvel Universe, these guys were not to be trifled with. Using city blocks as training grounds and causing cities to be rebuilt was child's play. Not to mention those big shots who often involved alien civilizations and mind control. Su Ling's mouth twitched involuntarily, but he quickly calmed down. System missions would not upgrade, for no reason. Its mission scope was gradually expanding. Such a huge change could only mean that ever since Su Ling obtained the second talisman, the system had already assumed that his combat power had entered another level. A mix of joy and worry. Su Ling murmured in his heart. But no matter what, once a mission appeared, it had to be completed. Even if the danger level was off the charts, he had to do it. With a thought, he closed the virtual box in front of him, but his thoughts never stopped. Having transmigrated to the Marvel Universe, the only superheroes Su Ling currently knew, besides Deadpool Wade, were the Punisher Frank. And there were only two supervillains mentioned in the mission requirements. Currently, it seems there's only Kingpin and that Francis. So the problem arose again. Francis was always elusive, even Wade, a top mercenary, couldn't find him. Where would Su Ling look? As for Kingpin, how was he supposed to get in touch with that guy? He couldn't just swagger down the street and charge in with the rabbit talisman. Who knew if this underground emperor had any powerful mutants by his side? And don't forget, Kingpin was a master of combat, and he had a scepter that could trigger various attacks like lasers, poison gas, and smoke. Just then, Weasel suddenly spoke, looking at the frowning Su Ling and saying, "Brother, don't make that face, I won't sell you out. Even if your intelligence is now being sold for millions of US dollars on the dark web. I'm still your friend." Su Ling's mouth twitched twice. Isn't your protesting too much expression a bit too obvious? Too lazy to continue this nonsense with Weasel, he waved his hand and said faintly, all right, let's stop this topic for now. Among all the messy things like dark web bounties, mercenary wanted lists, and gang roundup, the only thing Su Ling felt he should complete immediately was to find a reliable partner. Frank was indeed a tough fighter, even harder than anyone when he got serious. But the problem was also obvious. He had no superpowers, and he was probably still recovering from injuries at home. What about Wade? That guy had terrifying healing factors in his body, almost like another horse talisman. Healing ability plus formidable physical fitness plus an incredibly messed up fighting style made him the easiest superhero to establish a cooperative relationship with right now. Quickly reviewing the plot of Deadpool 1-inch in his mind, Su Ling looked up and asked, "By the way, Weasel, do you know the X-Men?" X-Men? Weasel didn't know why Su Ling suddenly brought up this topic, but he still tried to search through his notoriously bad memory. I have some impression. It's said to be an organization formed by a group of mutants, the righteous kind. But the last time I heard about them, I was still a bare-bottomed kid. This was clear. These guys were ridiculously old, almost urban legends. Su Ling nodded, not pressing further. In fact, he had a premonition deep down. This world had mutants, but there was no trace of the X-Men, as if this organization, once responsible for maintaining world peace, never existed. Without the X-Men, then Colossus and Negasonic Teenage Warhead naturally wouldn't appear. Without these two supporting, would the plot of Deadpool 1 also disappear? That would be too bad. So Su Ling immediately asked again. Weasel, where has Wade been recently? Although he's reconciled with Vanessa, he hasn't given up on finding Francis. Weasel shrugged. As far as I know, that guy has taken down many mutant research institutes, and I always feel that's not good. Su Ling hummed lightly, about to ask more about Wade's daily life. Ding-a-ling-ling. A sudden ringing sound. It was Weasel's phone. Weasel looked down at the caller ID, then shook the phone at Su Ling. It displayed Wade's name. As soon as the call connected, the furious roar almost deafened Weasel. That son of a fool. That fool. He kidnapped Vanessa. Sounds of things being thrown could be heard in the background. Get me weapons. Now. Immediately. Right now. I'm going to kill that son of a fool Francis. Weasel secretly thought. Not good, and at Su Ling's signal, he tried to comfort him. Wade, calm down, let's talk in person. When have I not been calm? I'm very fooling calm right now. The phone was hung up with a snap. Weasel still had his mouth open, wanting to say something more, but he was so startled by the sudden action that he couldn't react for a long time. What's with this guy? He dialed the number again, preparing to call Wade back. The next second. Bang! The door of the mercenary bar was kicked open. A red and black battlesuit, messy scratches on his body, dark red blood still dripping to the ground, coupled with those eyes so furious they could ignite the air. Wade appeared at the doorway like a major villain. Su Ling looked up. He could even see the flesh inside Wade's clothes wriggling and healing. This state, there was only one explanation. That guy must have just liquidated another mutant experimental institution. Most likely in a brutal way, with blood splattering and walls stained red. Weasel's face turned pale with fright, and he quickly rushed to the door, helping to prop up and close the broken door that Wade had almost kicked to pieces. Standing in the center of the bar, Wade exuded a dangerous aura of, say one more word of nonsense and I'll explode. However, Weasel still bravely stepped forward, attempting to appease this living bomb about to detonate with words. Calm down. Wade. You must calm down. Before he finished speaking, Wade raised his hand and punched, completely shattering the round table in front of him. Wood splinters exploded like fireworks, flying all over the room. His fingers broke instantly from the impact, but the next second they quickly corrected themselves as if in a reverse animation, and reattached. Wade's chest heaved violently, his eyes filled with crimson fury. Weapons. Give them to me now. Weasel looked at Su Ling for help, who slowly stood up and said to the Deadpool with a full rage bar. Wade, long time no see. Upon hearing Wade's slightly out of control roar on Weasel's phone, Su Ling quickly reacted. The plot of Deadpool 1 inch has begun. Francis, the guy who turned Wade into a monster, is truly the perfect supervillain for the system's mission. As long as they take him down together with Wade, the mission will definitely be completed. Even if there wasn't a mission, Su Ling would sooner or later end his dog's life with his own hands. He clearly remembered the dark, soul-wrenching experience in the research institute. For Su Ling, revenge was not just an empty phrase, but a principle ingrained in his bones. Hearing Su Ling greet him, Wade's anger did not diminish. His whole body was like a spring pulled to its limit, and he spoke very quickly. Good brother, I'm not in the mood to chat with you right now. Francis kidnapped Vanessa. I'm going to cut that guy's mouth off and stick it on my ass. Su Ling. He truly is Deadpool. Even when furious to the extreme, his venomous tongue attribute was still maxed out. But now was indeed not the time for teasing. Wade's love for Vanessa was the Pull's version of pure love. So Su Ling spoke. I know, that's why I plan to help you. As soon as the words fell, Wade almost immediately shook his head. You're mistaken, my good brother. I'm not going on vacation, and I'm certainly not going for a barbecue. You shouldn't get involved. Although Wade hadn't been to the mercenary bar these days, Weasel still kept him updated. Su Ling treating the black card missions as bedtime minigames also made Wade feel relieved. But it was just relief. Deep down, he didn't want Su Ling to participate in this operation. Rejected by Wade, Su Ling didn't show any dissatisfaction. On the contrary, he seemed to have anticipated this reaction, merely chuckled and said, "Don't you need weapons? I have some here." Before Wade could react, Su Ling had already pulled out his phone and skillfully dialed a number. Mr. Frank, I'm here to pick up my goods. 30 minutes later. Inside a room in an unknown apartment on the West Bank of Manhattan. Wade and Weasel stood frozen, instinctively looking at each other, then simultaneously turning their heads to the center of the room. There, piles of firearms were laid out. No, it should be called a small arsenal. M4s, M16s, automatic shotguns, even shoulder-fired rockets were there. Weasel's throat tightened, and he couldn't help but swallow, asking tremblingly. Brother, did you rob an army warehouse? Su Ling was also stunned, a little embarrassed by the military hardware all over the floor. He scratched the back of his head, revealing an awkward smile. This is a long story. When he left Frank's dilapidated wooden house, Su Ling did mention buying some weapons from the Punisher. After all, this was an era of hot weapons, and having more gear would never hurt. But Su Ling never expected Frank's generosity to completely exceed his understanding. These deadly weapons, if put on the black market, could directly make Su Ling financially independent. And he got them without spending a single penny. Looking back now, Su Ling only felt that his action of taking Frank along to fly and escape that night wasn't saving someone at all, it was making a fortune. The Punisher's favor was that valuable. Seeing that Su Ling had no intention of explaining where the weapons came from, Weasel and Wade didn't press further. Everyone has secrets. Asking too many questions is impolite. Wade jumped into the weapon mountain with a clang, rummaging through it like a dog digging. Su Ling, on the other hand, was much calmer. He casually picked up 2 Desert Eagles and tucked them into his waistband. Weasel looked at the scene and couldn't help but ask. Are you really going? I heard Wade say that Francis has a violent woman by his side. That's not something a gun can solve. Su Ling didn't explain. He just vanished from the spot with a whoosh. The next second, he reappeared with another whoosh. Weasel. He was completely stunned. That speed just now, it couldn't be described as just fast, it was teleportation, right? Rubbing his eyes, Weasel said. Brother, did you just instantly run to the end of the room and back? Yes, that's right, your eyesight is pretty good. Weasel's mouth formed a big O shape. He had even automatically generated a mental image. An Asian teenager, shouldering a rocket launcher, moving so fast he was a blur, chasing after that violent woman and blasting her to smithereens. The scene was so beautiful that Weasel even felt a little sorry for Francis and his crew. On the other side, that scene just now naturally didn't escape Wade's eyes either. He suddenly burst out of the weapon pile, with a magazine draped over his face and a submachine gun in his hand. Time to go. My good brother Su Ling. Today, we're going to blow that son of a fool Francis to pieces. 10 minutes later. In a shadow several hundred meters away from the target scrapyard. Wade, holding a submachine gun, pointed at the huge junkyard formed by piles of scrap metal and old vehicles, saying, That's the address Francis gave me. Su Ling narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction he pointed. The scrapyard looked much larger than in the movie, with only various piles of scrap and no sign of anyone. It almost had ambush written all over its face. Su Ling was silent for a moment, but still couldn't help but ask the crucial question. Do you have a plan? What are you going to do? Wade suddenly raised his submachine gun above his head with a whoosh, striking a somewhat exaggerated pose. Charge straight in and shoot all those fool dead. Then save my woman, Vanessa. At this point, he suddenly stroked his chin and thought seriously. Doesn't this process sound exactly like a hero saving the beauty? So, should it end with Vanessa throwing herself into my arms, me spinning her around 3 times, and then a passionate kiss. Su Ling looked at this guy with a face full of black lines. Where did that angry Deadpool go? However, he also had to admit one thing. What Wade said seemed to be not wrong. Things happened too suddenly, they had no time to arrange any rigorous tactical plans. Where the enemy was, how many there were, and if there were traps, all were completely unknown. Coupled with the fact that this was Francis's territory, it couldn't be a simple shootout. Most importantly, Vanessa couldn't suffer any harm, otherwise, even if Francis was killed, it would still be a failure for Wade. So, the plan of charging straight in was completely rejected by Su Ling. I still have to do it myself. Su Ling stared at the piles of scrap, his gaze darkening. He turned his head, patted Wade's shoulder, and said with an extremely serious tone. Stay right here, don't move. I'll go by you, no, I'll be right back. Before Wade could react, he saw Su Ling vanish with a whoosh. After a full 3 seconds, he mechanically raised his hand and uttered a sentence, looking in the direction Su Ling had disappeared. What the hell? Su Ling left quickly and returned just as fast. It was so fast that Wade only had time to glance down at a cockroach crawling on the ground. When he looked up again, his good brother was standing in front of him, as if he had materialized out of thin air. Wade jolted violently. He was about to say something, but Su Ling cut him off directly. Vanessa wasn't there. Francis wasn't there either. The entire scrap yard only had a few small fry. Tilting his head, Wade asked. What do you mean? You just went into scout. What else? Su Ling had a speechless expression. I couldn't have just gone to the bathroom, could I? Haha, you finally told the truth. You did go to the bathroom. Wade wore an expression of, I've seen through everything, and even nodded solemnly. Looking at the man with the peculiar thought process in front of him, Su Ling couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. It wasn't the first time he lamented that Wade's mind was truly incomprehensible to a normal person. Giving up on wasting time on such pointless entanglement, Su Ling looked ahead and fell into contemplation. He had just used the speed of the rabbit talisman to scout the area. The original idea was to use the advantage of speed to find Vanessa, and even if he couldn't bring her out directly, he could at least ascertain the enemy's movements. Now, it seemed he had run the trip for nothing. He recalled the scene of his high-speed traversal. The vast scrap yard was terrifyingly quiet, as if someone had pressed the pause button. An indescribable sense of strangeness rose in Su Ling's heart. Just then, footsteps suddenly came from the front right of the two men. Wade swiftly poked his head out, then lowered his voice and said. 5 in total, looks like they're patrol guys. They're dressed exactly like the scum I cleaned out at the research institute before. He held up 3 fingers toward Su Ling, then pointed 2 fingers to the left, giving the tactical signal for, split up. The 2 on the left are yours, I'll handle the other 3. However, Su Ling only glanced at him, then slowly shook his head. Wade was stunned. Wait, are you going to vanish again with a swoosh? I could, but there's no need. Su Ling, having decided against using the rabbit talisman's ability, drew a black pistol from his waist. The pistol looked a little strange. More accurately, it was somewhat small and delicate. Bang bang bang. Following the tiny gunshots, 5 armed soldiers collapsed onto the ground. Wade, whose professional dedication was at max level, drew his long swords and prepared to finish them off. But when he approached the bodies, he noticed that a miniature syringe was embedded in the neck of each of the 5 men, and they were still constantly foaming at the mouth. This completely baffled Wade. His good brother had healing abilities no weaker than his own, could teleport, and now used poison too. What the hell is this if not a walking cheat code? Recalling the scene where he had rejected Su Ling back at the mercenary bar, Wade's old face under the Deadpool mask couldn't help but flush red. He awkwardly coughed twice and asked Su Ling as he approached. What kind of move was that? After stopping, Su Ling glanced at the patrol soldiers twitching like electric eels and explained. An unknown hybrid toxin, made by Frank. It allows them to die without pain. Wade. If it weren't for the agonizing expressions right in front of him, he almost would have believed Su Ling's bullshit. You call this fooling painless? Su Ling raised his hand, patted his shoulder, and strode forward, saying as he walked. Let's go. We'll go inside first. Oh, right, you have to listen to me, understand? This time, Wade nodded quite uncharacteristically. Understood. For Vanessa, I'll do it. Of course, after rescuing Vanessa, I'm still going to kiss her. You won't stop me, right? Who the hell wants to stop you? Following a dilapidated path that seemed to lead nowhere, the two continued deeper into the scrap yard. The road grew narrower and narrower, littered everywhere with abandoned metal containers, piles of disassembled parts, and various broken machinery whose purpose was indiscernible, discarded in corners. Although they occasionally encountered a few patrol soldiers on the way, facing these two was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot, purely serving up kills. Su Ling also got a close-up look at the methods of the famous Deadpool. It was hundreds of times more brutal than in the movie. As they walked, the two suddenly stopped simultaneously. Because the path ahead was completely blocked by a massive steel plate. On the other side of the steel plate, faint sounds of dense footsteps could be heard. Su Ling recalled that he had used the rabbit talisman to visit this area before, but due to time constraints, he hadn't thought about going inside to look. Wade naturally also sensed that something was amiss. The two exchanged glances, showing perfect synchronization. The next second, they jumped up almost simultaneously, stepped onto the small mountain of trash beside them, and easily climbed over the massive steel plate. However, when they peered over, what greeted their eyes was a dense crowd of fully armed soldiers. Among these people were naturally Su Ling and Wade's targets for this mission, Francis and Gina. But the most conspicuous sight was the oxygen chamber standing at the back of the crowd. That was the very equipment used to torture Wade back then. Only this time, the person lying inside was Vanessa. Her face was pale, and she was in extremely poor condition. Whether she was alive or dead was unknown. Seeing the woman he loved reduced to this state, Wade felt as if something was wrenching his chest. He stared intently at Vanessa inside the oxygen chamber, the bloodshot veins in his eyes increasing rapidly. If Su Ling hadn't been standing beside him, he probably would have jumped down already and chopped all those armed scumbags below into meat paste. But whether it was back at the research institute or during this operation, Wade had gradually grown accustomed to following Su Ling's commands. He couldn't quite explain that strange feeling himself. If Su Ling didn't speak, he had to endure it. Anyway, listening to this guy was always the right move. Adjusting his breathing, Wade whispered. Tell me, how should we? But this time, Su Ling did not immediately provide a course of action as he had before. He suddenly said something very strange. Wade, if you want to cure your face. After this mission is over, come find me. Wade was completely stunned. Cure his face. Is now the time to discuss this. Before he even had time to question it, he saw Su Ling lower his body and then leap down sharply. While sliding down, Su Ling skillfully pulled 3 grenades from behind him, the sound of the pins being pulled immediately following. What the hell? Our plan. Where's our tactics? But the only response to Wade's confusion was Su Ling's roar. The plan is, no plan. Just. Su Ling violently flung his hand, and the 3 grenades shot like meteors toward the crowd below. Blow them all to hell. Boom. The impact of the explosion burst open below, shaking the entire scrap yard. Wade watched Su Ling charge down with a blank expression, but soon began trembling all over from excitement. I absolutely love this tactic. He grabbed his twin swords, his eyes shining like 2 LED lights. Undying duo, charge. In fact, the moment Su Ling saw the pile of scum gathered below, he could no longer control himself. A group of enemies standing together, if not now, then when should he blow them up? What's more, he had already spotted Vanessa. With the extreme speed granted by the rabbit talisman, he had absolute confidence in his judgment and execution. Even if Francis intended to use Vanessa to threaten Wade, he could still rescue Vanessa from the oxygen chamber. Therefore, Su Ling felt he didn't need to hold back at all. Die. A murderous glint flashed in Su Ling's eyes. He raised his hand and tossed out 5 more grenades, which landed squarely in the most densely populated area of soldiers. Boom. Explosions occurred one after another, turning many soldiers who hadn't reacted into immediate fragments. Meanwhile, on the other side, Francis and Gina, who had been excitedly discussing how to torture Wade after catching him, were completely stunned by the sudden explosion. Bang! The residual force of the explosion flung them away like rag dolls. Smoke and dust filled the air, mixed with screams. At the center of the chaos, Su Ling landed steadily. He looked up and shouted. Wade. Go all out. I've got Vanessa covered. Thud. The famous Deadpool descended from the sky like Su Ling's summon, landing firmly beside Su Ling, raising his twin katanas, and charging in. He trusted Su Ling even more than he trusted himself. Although the sudden explosion caught Francis and Gina off guard. They were not ordinary people, after all. As mutants, they returned to the scene in just a few seconds. After clearly seeing the two figures continuously slaughtering his soldiers in the smoke, Francis's face became increasingly distorted. Wade appearing here brazenly didn't actually surprise him. After Wade had slaughtered so many of his labs, even if Francis were a pig, he would know Wade's abilities. But Su Ling's appearance was what truly exceeded his expectations. Francis spat fiercely onto the ground and said coldly. Didn't you say you took care of him? Gina's expression also darkened upon hearing this. She clearly remembered knocking that guy unconscious. Could the sound of bones shattering have been fooled? But soon, a hint of realization flashed in Francis's eyes. He instantly connected all the illogical pieces and then flashed that disgusting smile that made one want to shove his face into a blender. I understand. This fooled Asian, just like that ugly freak Wade, he obtained the healing factor. Francis licked the corner of his mouth. This meant he had two new toys. Gina, the chance to redeem yourself is yours. Don't disappoint me. Right at this moment. Bang! A gunshot shattered the air. The bullet grazed Francis's cheek, leaving a bloody streak on his skin, and blood dripped down his face. Wade, who never missed, had uncharacteristically misfired this shot. Through the smoke, Wade raised his pistol, his entire body trembling with rage. You, fooled piece of trash. How dare you, do this to my Vanessa? Francis had already opened his mouth, ready to mock him with, did your hand shake? But before the words left his lips, his sixth sense exploded in his mind like an alarm. Danger. In that instant, relying on years of combat instinct, Francis forced his body to react at an incredible speed. Clang. Raising the weapon in his hand, he barely managed to block the blade slashing toward his face. Sparks flew, and the sound of vibrating metal made his eardrums tingle. The owner of that blade was, without a doubt, Su Ling. Staring at Su Ling, who was right in front of him, Francis's pupils contracted. When did this guy appear in front of me? I was clearly still watching Wade, without even a second of distraction in between. This speed is completely wrong. Is it a new mutant ability? No. How could that be? How could one person possess multiple abilities? Oh. You dare to get distracted. Su Ling's voice dragged Francis back to reality. Being shot in the head would be mercy for you. Wait and I will torture you viciously until you kneel down and call us daddy. Saying this, Su Ling raised his long blade again and chopped down fiercely. It was only then that Francis truly reacted. The real threat today wasn't Wade at all, but this Asian youth whom he had never once taken seriously. Gina. Go smash that fool into pieces. Then come back and support me. With that, he exerted force on his wrist, knocking Su Ling back into the smoke. The instant she received the order, Gina slightly squatted her legs. The steel plate beneath her feet instantly buckled with a crack, and visible air waves appeared around her. The next second, boom, she shot out like a cannonball. If she hit it, Vanessa inside the oxygen chamber wouldn't even be left with ashes. However, just as Gina was about to hit the oxygen chamber, she suddenly stopped. Because there was nothing. Wah! What? She stared at the empty compartment, her face slightly stunned. This is impossible, absolutely impossible. She had clearly just seen Vanessa lying inside. Where is she? Where is she? Where did that fooled woman go? This scene caused Gina's brain to crash for several seconds. On the other side, although Francis had temporarily forced Su Ling back, he was now entangled in a fierce fight with Wade, who had jumped out. Hearing no crashing sound from afar, a sense of unease inexplicably rose in his heart, and he finally couldn't help but roar. Gina. What are you doing? Francis's words came to an abrupt halt. Because he saw Gina frozen in place in the completely empty oxygen chamber. Amidst this bizarre atmosphere, a cheeky voice entered Francis's ear. Did you think that shot I fired was a mistake? It was to attract the attention of an idiot like you. Francis fully realized what had happened upon hearing this. So that's it. It was that Asian guy. Using a speed his eyes couldn't even track, he had rescued Vanessa just like that. This wasn't just provocation, it was a blatant slap in the face. It was practically the same as telling Francis, "You can't do anything to me." Francis, having understood the situation, finally broke out into a look of complete ferocity. This fooled Asian trash. But what greeted him was only Wade's increasingly frantic offensive. Unbound by Vanessa, Wade's attack speed soared, and he had transformed into a beast determined not to stop until Francis was minced. "Gina, stop standing there. Go find that Asian guy." Gina, startled awake by the roar, shook her head, and the fury in her eyes intensified. "You trashy Asian, where are you? Oh, are you looking for me?" The voice came from behind, and Gina whipped her head around. This time, she didn't see a fist, a blade, or that unsettlingly calm Asian face. Instead, she saw the dark muzzle of a rocket launcher, and the rocket shell about to burst forth. In the distance, Francis and Wade were completely entangled. Blades, fists, steel pipes, it could be said that these two were smashing every conceivable object at each other. Francis exerted force in his wrist, directly forcing Wade back. And the remaining soldiers lurking in the shadows finally seized the opportunity, unleashing all their firepower on Wade. Da da da. Bullets poured down like rain. An ordinary person facing such a barrage of gunfire wouldn't last 5 seconds. But Wade was not only unafraid, he was even cursing amidst the hail of bullets. "Can't you fools aim a little better? Can you stop shooting me here? Not there either. Forget it, you guys should just die. Your aim is truly terrible." As he spoke, he rolled, picked up a submachine gun from the ground, and easily dealt with the soldier in the distance who had just pulled out a magazine. The sight of bullets piercing through various parts of Wade's body and then rapidly fusing back together fell into Francis's eyes. At this moment, a hint of joy flashed deep in his gaze. No, it should be greed. It was exactly like the excitement a villain feels upon seeing a great treasure. Francis wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and spoke. "I have to admit, I truly underestimated you before. The healing ability to resurrect from death is simply too perfect." In his eyes, Wade was simply a priceless treasure. If he had known back at the research institute that this guy's healing ability was so powerful, he would never have discarded Wade like a waste product. Looking at Francis's expression, Wade made a retching motion. He, who was usually full of witty remarks, was even speechless at this moment. He raised the submachine gun in his hand, intending to unleash a burst on this guy, but when he pulled the trigger, he realized it was out of bullets. Wade had no choice but to throw it away, redrawing his twin swords and saying, "Your eyes make me sick. I've changed my mind, I'm not going to cut off your mouth and put it on my ass anymore, you might stick your tongue out." Just as the two were about to charge at each other again, a piercing scream came from the front. It was Gina. That heart-wrenching shriek echoed over the entire junkyard. Because the sound was too tragic, not only Wade and Francis, but even the soldiers who were crawling after being blown up, couldn't help but look up simultaneously towards the source of the sound. The next second, everyone was petrified on the spot. Because what they saw was a sight that simply couldn't be described in words. On that open ground, where fire intertwined and smoke billowed, Su Ling, carrying a rocket launcher, was constantly moving around Gina in an incredible way. It wasn't ordinary running, but teleportation. He was like a ghostly shadow, flickering around Gina. Each flash left only an afterimage. But this wasn't the most terrifying part. Every time Su Ling appeared, it was accompanied by the firing of a rocket. One after another, thrown out as if they cost nothing, all without exception slammed into Gina's position. Such close-range bombardment instantly transformed Gina from the famous Sand Angel into Charred Angel, Fragment Angel. As a mutant, Gina could control the hormones in her body to achieve explosive enhancements. But even the strongest buffs became a complete joke under such close-range rocket bombardment. Not to mention, Su Ling's methods were extremely ruthless. To maximize Gina's pain, he would even occasionally bestow a rocket that deliberately missed its target. Just as Gina recovered a bit, the next rocket would follow close behind. It's no exaggeration to say that Gina wished she didn't have this fooled recovery ability. Each regeneration was only to welcome the next destruction, so what was the point of it? Such a cycle, repeated over and over, was hundreds, even thousands of times more cruel than direct death. Wade watched the rocket torture cycle, over there, resting his chin on one hand. During the raids on those research institutes, he had also used various extremely sinister torture methods on those fooled soldiers. But Su Ling's tactic of recover a little, blast a little, recover again, blast again made even the famous Deadpool gasp in cold air. This was truly heartbreaking to witness, and tear-jerking to hear. Unlike Wade, Francis's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. Gina was his strongest combat force, a mutant superwoman who could single-handedly suppress an entire squad. Yet, such an absurdly strong combat force was beaten into this indescribable tragic state. Watching Su Ling continuously teleporting, a thought suddenly popped into Francis's mind. This is simply a devil. Boom. As the last rocket traced its trajectory in the air, the explosion's fire engulfed Gina, and her body was blasted away, tumbling. This charred mutant could no longer even scream. Su Ling casually tossed aside the rocket launcher, which had become hot from use, and didn't forget to praise, Frank's products are always excellent. He walked forward, looked at Gina, who was barely breathing, and snorted coldly. That's what you get for bumping into me back then. This is the consequence of bumping into your old man, understood? Unfortunately, Gina couldn't reply to him. Su Ling no longer looked at her, but instead raised his head and cast his gaze towards the other end of the battlefield. Francis still maintained his trademark, deadpan face, but that was merely on the surface. Su Ling's bizarre, ghost-like teleportation speed, unknown healing ability, and merciless cruel methods, even if Francis were a pig, he should have realized by now that this guy was not someone he could handle, not to mention there was also a bloodthirsty Wade. Dealing with one lunatic was bad enough. 2 lunatics, this wasn't a battle, it was a death sentence. But, where was the retreat route? Could he even escape? Hundreds of rounds of fighting with Wade had already caused his stamina to rapidly decline. He had originally placed his hopes on Gina, but now, failure was already a foregone conclusion. Having understood this, Francis held the axe in his hand horizontally across his chest. There was no trace of panic or fear on his face. It was as if facing such a deadly predicament, he was simply standing on an experimental platform, preparing to give a speech. After all, he had long lost the sensation of pain. This deficiency made his expression eternally like still water. To be honest, I'm quite envious of you guys. Francis looked down at the old scars and cracks on the back of his hand. I myself was once a patient at the research institute. It's just a pity that the mutant ability I awakened wasn't powerful. It only enhanced my reaction speed and slightly improved my physical fitness. Although I can't feel pain, those wounds don't heal instantly. Such terrifying regenerative abilities like yours are a level one can never hope to reach in my lifetime. Then, Francis rarely showed a smile. That smile was like a scientist looking at his experiment, devoid of emotion, yet filled with twisted pride. You should thank me. It was I who granted you such powerful abilities. The healing factors within your bodies can repair all injuries. This is the perfect power that countless people dream of. The air was silent for half a second. Su Ling and Wade exchanged glances across the distance. Both of them saw the same thought in each other's eyes. What the hell is this idiot talking about? Su Ling gave Wade another look, and the latter nodded, understanding. At this moment, their fighting intent was perfectly synchronized. The next instant, the two of them, like looking into a mirror, struck the exact same starting pose. Bodies slightly leaned, right foot staggered, arms pulled back. Like 2 springs poised to strike. Swish. The air seemed to be cut open. The 2 figures simultaneously vanished from their spots, leaving only the cracked metal marks on the ground. Francis's pupils constricted. He raised his axe, making a final defensive posture. But it was far from enough. PFF'd. It was the sound of a sharp weapon cutting. Francis's left and right arms flew into the air simultaneously in an extremely bizarre manner. His 2 severed arms hit the ground, and he also fell to his knees with a thud. Francis lowered his head, his eyes finally changing from fanaticism to emptiness. He knew very well that he was about to reach the end of it all. Wade brandished his dual blades, walking step by step towards Francis, who was kneeling on the ground. His face had regained that familiar, punchable smile. Su Ling also approached from the other side. Wade looked at Su Ling, chuckled, and spoke with a typical Deadpool-esque bad joke. Well done, my good brother. I was going to cut off his. Don't say it. Su Ling waved his hand directly, preventing the most disgusting words in the world from appearing. All right, I won't say those two words. Then, Su Ling half squatted, pulled out the Desert Eagle from his waist, which he had brought from the mountain of weapons, and pressed it against Francis's forehead, saying, You are not the founder of the Research Institute. Tell me, who is the person behind the Research Institute? Based on his previous chat with Weasel, Su Ling realized that there seemed to be no X-Men in this world. Does that mean that those major crises under the X-Men system are also unlikely to exist? But Su Ling always felt that something wasn't quite right. The scale of the Research Institute, its armed forces, and the number of experimental subjects couldn't possibly be accomplished by one person. So he had to confirm. And Francis, kneeling before him, was the most direct breakthrough. Francis looked up at Su Ling's cold, emotionless eyes and chuckled twice. Hee, do it. I don't know anything. You really think I can't do anything to you, do you? Su Ling poked Francis's head a few times with the butt of the Desert Eagle, then raised his hand and pressed his palm against Francis's forehead. Insulting me this way. I don't believe in that god stuff. However, before Francis's words even landed, the next second, his expression instantly twisted. Pain. Real pain. The long-lost sensation of pain swept through Francis's entire body like a tide. That excruciating pain, which directly tore at his nerves, felt as if it was forcibly tearing his soul from his body. The man who hadn't felt pain for many years, for the first time, screamed like an ordinary person. Ah! That sound was even more terrifying than Gina's just now. Wade tilted his head, a little confused. He looked at Francis twitching on the ground, then at Su Ling's hand pressed against his forehead, his eyes full of big question marks. What happened? Su Ling said indifferently. I restored his severed peripheral nerves. Wade. After 2 seconds, he reacted. When did you get this ability? Su Ling didn't bother to explain. Such a childish operation was as easy as pie for the horse talisman. He continued to stare at Francis and slowly said, I will heal you, and then torment you every minute, every second. Making you experience the true meaning of a fate worse than death. Now. Su Ling pressed the gun muzzle against his forehead again. Are you still not going to speak? Francis's face was pale, his lips trembling constantly. The pain made even moving feel like torture. But he had no doubt about the devil Su Ling's words, and he stammered. Essex's company. I was following their orders. He gasped for breath, paused, and then continued. As for the higher-ups of the company, those true managers. I don't know, they never showed their faces. Having said that, Francis felt as if all his strength had been drained, and he knelt there, trembling constantly. Essex Corporation, Su Ling recalled in his mind. If he remembered correctly, this organization was one of the masterminds behind all the X-Men movie universes. From Wolverine to Deadpool, from the Weapon X project to mutant experiments, its tentacles could be said to have spread throughout the entire series. This also meant that the X-Men system's crisis had not disappeared. Or rather, it hadn't reached its breaking point yet. Su Ling couldn't help but pinch his brow. Why are these crises coming one after another? Having received the desired information, the mission naturally had to be completed quickly. Su Ling raised the Desert Eagle in his hand and directly pulled the trigger. Bang! The bullet pierced Francis's forehead, and blood and brains mixed together, splattering onto the metal floor. Francis's body twitched, then slowly leaned forward, falling down with a thud. Almost at the same time, that familiar mechanical sound rang in Su Ling's ear. Mission content. Assist a superhero to kill a supervillain, 1/1. Mission complete. Mission settlement in progress. Wade stared at the fallen Francis, his dual-wielding motion paused. His voice rang in Su Ling's ear. Why did you kill him? I was counting on him to fix my face. Wade wanted to say something more, but suddenly stopped. He looked at Su Ling and suddenly realized, wasn't the best doctor in the world standing right in front of him. Su Ling glanced at him, asking with a half smile. Remember what I said. As you can see, I can heal your face. But the cost will be to take away all the self-healing factors in your body. The horse talisman is an existence that heals everything, so the self-healing factor, in the eyes of the horse talisman, is likely also considered an foreign object. Su Ling was not a surgeon who could precisely eliminate it. Hearing this, Wade froze in place. He subconsciously raised his hand to touch his mask, then fell silent for a few seconds, finally sighing. It doesn't matter. Vanessa is used to me already. Wade shrugged. She cares about me, not this face. And I don't want to lose the ability to protect her. Su Ling nodded. This was Wade's choice, and he respected this guy. Raising his hand to pat Wade's shoulder, Su Ling said with a smile. Let's go. I put Vanessa in the car we came in. Wade first let out a soft, hum. The next second, he jumped up as if electrocuted. How did you save Vanessa? Did you carry her? Did you? He grabbed Su Ling's collar, screaming like a frantic rooster. How could you do that? I haven't even performed the kissing finale in front of you yet. How dare you carry her? I haven't even carried her enough. Su Ling rolled his eyes and forcefully shook him off. Can you be normal? I was saving someone at the time, not stealing your girlfriend. You can steal anyone but Vanessa, but you have to ask me. As a man, I'm very open-minded. If it really doesn't work, we can call Weasel and have a. Shut up. Su Ling really didn't want to continue listening to such mentally polluting topics. Just as he moved his feet and started walking forward, the mechanical sound in his ear rang out again. Ding! Detected that the host completed the mission beyond expectations, triggering the reward doubling mechanism. Mission reward. Plunder points, +2. Do you want to use plunder points? Yes, no. At this moment, Su Ling felt his heart rate accelerating. To be honest, the first time he saw this mission, he instinctively felt a little resistant. After all, eliminating a supervillain carried immense risk. But after seeing these rewards, Su Ling felt that it was all worth it. So, my system is like a ruthless machine, watching me constantly, right? After quickly reviewing the entire process from accepting the mission to completing it in his mind, Su Ling quickly understood the underlying logic for the doubled reward. Eliminating Gina, a powerful mutant, and successfully forcing information about the Essex Corporation behind Francis. It was the combination of these two feats that earned the system's high score evaluation. Now, with 2 plunder points credited, it not only represented an increase in strength but also meant Su Ling had more room for error. Even in the unluckiest scenario, if he really got the useless sheep talisman, didn't he still have 1 point left to use? Withdrawing his thoughts, Su Ling made a decision and unhesitatingly chose the flashing option yes. This time, the plunder took a little longer than the rabbit talismans. About 10 seconds later, accompanied by a buzz, a line of large text appeared on the light screen in front of Su Ling. Plunder successful. Plundered source world. Jackie Chan Adventures World. Plundered target. 12 talismans, dragon talisman. Holy crap. Huge gain. This wave was truly a massive gain. Su Ling almost burst out laughing right there. Which of the 12 talismans is the most violent? Without a doubt, it's the dragon talisman. Anyone who has watched Jackie Chan Adventures knows how terrifying this thing is. Essentially, it is the source of Shendu's explosive power. In the original work, the power of the dragon talisman could continuously strengthen as the user's rage increased. It could be said that the stronger the anger, the greater the explosive power released by the dragon talisman. Shendu himself could even release dragon explosions bare-handed and precisely control the talisman's energy. That was a terrifying power that was pure, violent, and limitless. And now, all of this would become a part of Su Ling. Having previous experience using the horse talisman and the rabbit talisman, Su Ling was confident that he would be even more proficient in controlling the dragon talisman than Shendu himself. Su Ling adjusted his breathing, quickly calming his emotions. In his sea of consciousness, he could clearly perceive the rabbit talisman, the horse talisman, and the third talisman, the dragon talisman, which had just been implanted by the system, quietly floating in midair. 3 completely different powers circled each other, like deadly weapons ready to be unleashed at any moment. Although they couldn't be called top tier in the Marvel world, where combat power often reached cosmic or dimensional levels. But at least these three talismans made Su Ling feel, for the first time, that he wasn't doomed, but had hope of surviving. Just as he was immersed in the change in power, Wade, standing beside him, couldn't help but wrinkle his face. The guy saw Su Ling frozen in place, thinking his recent suggestion had shattered Su Ling's worldview. Do people in Asia not like playing together in groups? Wade scratched his head and muttered softly. Buddy. I take back what I just said. I respect your culture. We just won't call Weasel. But before he could finish speaking, Su Ling raised his hand directly, interrupting the guy's continued nonsense. Wade, be quiet. The famous Deadpool shrank his head like a school kid who had made a mistake in front of Su Ling, sheathing his titanium alloy twin swords behind him, and shut up. At this moment, a brand new system prompt popped up again on the virtual interface in front of Su Ling. Continue to use plunder points. Yes, no. Obviously, only one of the two plunder points had been used. The system was already reminding Su Ling about the other point. His eyes narrowed slightly, and a rare trace of hesitation appeared. Because Su Ling had realized one thing, his system was not kind. It was constantly evaluating the host's combat performance, growth rate, and environment. Although it only generated missions under specific conditions, there was no doubt that the mission difficulty was increasing. That is to say, facing Su Ling, who now possessed 3 talismans, the next mission the system gave would definitely reach new heights of difficulty. In that case, won't obtaining plunder points become even harder? Su Ling muttered to himself. From the most rational perspective, he should save this point and only use it when he truly faced a life or death situation in the future. But as soon as this idea formed, Su Ling shook his head sharply, casting this rational yet erroneous thought out of his mind. He didn't have the luxury of waiting. Time was the most luxurious commodity for the current Su Ling. The huge crisis hidden behind the X-Men structure, the Essex Corporation, the shockingly high black market bounty, and Kingpin, whom Frank mentioned. Not to mention the many unknown dangers lurking in the darkness that Su Ling was completely unaware of. There was only one thing he could do, and that was to quickly become stronger. Forget it. It's better than drawing the sheep talisman during a crisis. Thinking this, Su Ling looked at the slightly glowing option on the virtual interface and clicked the yes button again. Analyzing 10,000 worlds targets. Plunder successful. Plundered source world. Jackie Chan Adventures world. Plundered target. Shendu's amplification ability, summon Shotokan. Parallel timeline, Jackie Chan Adventures world. The corridor lights in section 13 flickered. Jackie Chan stood in the middle of the corridor with his arms crossed, his brow furrowed tightly. The scene of the horse talisman and the rabbit talisman suddenly flashing and disappearing before his eyes kept replaying in his mind. The talismans, they can't just disappear into thin air like this. But Uncle said he's never seen this happen either, it's too bizarre. Just then, Jackie Chan. An urgent call came from the depths of the corridor. Jackie Chan suddenly looked up and saw Captain Black running toward him. What is it, Captain Black? Get over here quickly. That white light seems to have appeared again. Jackie Chan's expression changed drastically, and he quickly ran forward. The two rushed one after the other, heading straight for the secure area deep within Section 13, where the talismans were stored. Jackie Chan's heart pounded faster and faster. The rabbit talisman disappeared, the horse talisman disappeared, could it be? It's happening again. However, just as the two were about to reach the heavy door of the talisman vault, the white light suddenly flared up. The intensity was even more dazzling than when the horse talisman and rabbit talisman disappeared previously. This is bad. Captain Black, a talisman is disappearing again. As Jackie Chan spoke, he lunged forward and grabbed the doorknob. Bang! The door was yanked open directly. But it was already too late. The white light instantly engulfed the talisman storage area. The dragon talisman, which they had struggled to retrieve from the dark hand, just vanished into thin air. Black stared blankly at everything happening before his eyes, cold sweat instantly breaking out on his forehead. Jackie Chan, what on earth is going on? Meanwhile, in a distant cavern, Shendu also sensed something unusual. Deep within the cave, greenish ghost flames flickered on the walls. Valmont kept his head down in silence, letting the Lord's hoarse voice, burning with fury, echo through the cave. This mission, he had failed again. When competing with Jackie Chan for the Dragon Talisman, due to his accidental mistake, he fell directly into the sea from the boat. And that fatal fall allowed that annoying Jackie Chan to easily pick up the Dragon Talisman. The Black Hand has been humiliated by Jackie Chan's group countless times already. It would be a miracle if the Lord wasn't angry. What's worse, the Dragon Talisman was the Lord's life talisman. Losing it was like losing the Lord's lifeblood. So when Valmont cautiously entered this cave, he was already mentally prepared to be severely scolded. Anyway, this guy needs me. He can't do anything to me. Thinking this, Valmont also let out a sigh of relief. But suddenly, the Lord's voice in his ear came to an abrupt halt. The roars that had been echoing earlier suddenly vanished completely, leaving only the crackling sound of burning in the cave. Valmont flinched in fright, thinking that his inner thoughts had been seen through by this guy. He cautiously raised his head, only to see the Lord's statue hanging on the cave wall suddenly become completely silent. Valmont froze entirely. Lord, what's wrong with you? The Lord ignored Valmont's call. His voice suddenly surged, but clearly with a hint of anxiety. Shotokan. 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 Appear quickly. Valmont was somewhat puzzled. Having followed the Lord for so long, in his memory, as long as the Lord gave the order, the Shotokan would surely surge out of the shadows like a tide. But this time, the greenish ghost flames cast large shadows in the cave, yet not a single ninja appeared. Not even a trace of energy fluctuation. Silence and eeriness seemed to freeze the air throughout the cave. Valmont was completely stunned. What happened? The Lord was silent for a full 2 seconds before speaking. My Shotokan. I can't use them anymore. From the Lord's voice, Valmont heard a hint of weariness, which had never appeared before. What? How could this thing be unusable? If he couldn't use it, how could he fight against Jackie Chan and his group? Valmont felt his head buzzing. Lord, you're joking, right? What on earth happened? Marvel Universe. Su Ling's mind stirred, and the personal information panel in front of him expanded with a hum. Myriad Worlds Plunder System. Host. Su Ling. Strength. 51. Durability. 80. Agility. 31 without using the Rabbit Talisman. Current abilities. Horse Talisman. The magical power of the horse with healing abilities, deeply bound to the host's soul, purifies all abnormal conditions caused by external forces within the body and repairs all lesions and injuries. Note: the noble horse will make you ignore all pain, but only if you still have a breath left. Rabbit Talisman New. The magical power of the rabbit with super speed, deeply bound to the host's soul, can reach supersonic speeds. Dragon Talisman New. The magical power of the dragon with infinite energy, deeply bound to the host's soul, can continuously strengthen with the host's anger. Summon Shotokan New. Can summon shadow ninjas without restriction, they are the host's most loyal subordinates. Note: since the Lord's ability to summon Shotokan was stolen from the Oni mask, ninja, only ordinary ninja groups can be summoned. Plunder points. 2-0. Su Ling stared at the ability panel in front of him, more satisfied than he could ever be. Clearly, he had gambled correctly. If he had hesitated just now, he wouldn't have obtained this level of power. The Dragon Talisman, Ultimate Destruction. Shotokan, Infinite Summoning. These two abilities combined, it's no exaggeration to say, gave him a complete, system-level, growth path. Su Ling shifted his gaze to the small note below the summoned Shotokan ability. He keenly caught the vast amount of information contained in that sentence. Oni mask, huh? Based on the memories in his mind, Su Ling remembered that this thing was a special magical artifact in the original work that sealed the 9 great Oni generals. Each of those 9 great Oni generals possessed magic powerful enough to destroy a country. If the 9 masks were gathered simultaneously, they would unleash ultimate darkness upon the world. In the animation, that was a villain faction capable of plunging the entire Earth into an extinction-level crisis. Although Su Ling currently plundered it from the Lord. But the system's clear reminder made the flame of ambition ignited by power in his heart grow stronger and stronger. The 12 talismans could still be plundered. The Oni masks might also be plundered. Once the 12 talismans were gathered, plus the 9 masks, what kind of concept would that be? That was no longer about saving one's life. It was the power to dominate a region. Su Ling could clearly feel his ambition rapidly expanding. When he first transmigrated, he just wanted to survive. Later, he wanted to possess the power to protect himself. And then, he wanted to control the situation and not be threatened by any force. And now, his deepest goal was quietly undergoing a qualitative change. He was no longer satisfied with living. He wanted to continuously become stronger, even stronger. Strong enough to make the world revolve around him. But that was for the future. For now, he had to live in the present, with his feet firmly on the ground. Still need to be steady, absolutely can't rush blindly. Su Ling exhaled, then with a thought, the virtual frame instantly closed. The world returned to the real junk recycling plant. He looked up at Wade, who was still standing in front of him. Wade was somewhat bored, squatting on the ground, continuously poking the long-dead Francis with a stone. He really wanted to have a good, hearty corpse flogging competition. Su Ling reached out and patted him, revealing a meaningful smile. Wade, can you do me a favor? Wade nodded without the slightest hesitation. Of course, my good brother. The moment his voice fell, he suddenly shivered, and all the hairs on his body stood on end. A very ominous premonition surged into Wade's heart. Because he saw a wicked, evil smile, worse than any other, curling at the corner of Su Ling's mouth. Wade. The next second. Gurgle gurgle. The ground wriggled like boiling black cement. Shadows, as if pulled by some force, surged from all directions towards the center. Then, paw, paw, paw. 1, 3, dozens, densely packed shadow ninjas continuously crawled out from the cracks in the shadows, instantly surrounding Wade. Wade was stunned for several seconds, then let out a sharp scream. F.A.C.K. What are you doing? Su Ling, however, merely folded his arms across his chest, watching the scene with the posture of a superior, and said with a smile. Wade, help me test something. Just how capable are these loyal subordinates of mine? Swish. These shadow ninjas almost simultaneously drew the long swords from their backs, approaching Wade step by step. Wade wished he could find a crack in the ground to crawl into, but he found that even those cracks were spewing out figures. He shouted in despair. Su Ling, aren't we, brothers? Wade didn't know how much time had passed. Maybe 5 minutes. Or perhaps 10. He even started to suspect he had fallen into a time loop. But one thing Wade knew clearly was that he had barely stopped swinging the titanium alloy twin blades in his hands. Relying on his years of practical experience as a mercenary, Wade's figure weaved and dodged amidst the flashes of blades. Cutting, horizontal slashes, back stabs, he used every trick he had. But the shadow ninjas kept pouring out like a tide. To be honest, at first, Wade was genuinely worried he might use too much force and injure Su Ling's group of loyal subordinates. But now, it seemed that worry was pure bullshit. By the looks of it, he was the one in the most danger. Swish. A flash of blade light swept past, cleanly severing the neck of the nearest shadow ninja, whose shadow-like body immediately dispersed into a cloud of black mist. Wade was about to press his advantage and charge forward, but before he could take a step, he realized all the surrounding shadow ninjas had stopped simultaneously. Wade froze for a few seconds, then subconsciously looked up, gazing at the high ground. Su Ling was currently sitting on the wreckage of an old car that had been bombed down to its chassis, resting his chin on one hand, seemingly deep in thought. At this point, Wade understood. The fooled training was finally over. Releasing his twin blades, he plopped down onto the ground with a loud thud. Although Wade, possessing the self-healing factor, could recover quickly, the sheer number of opponents was too high. This is more exhausting than fighting that fool Francis. Wade waved the twin blades in his hands. Su Ling, you have to treat me to steak later. No. Wait. You have to treat me to a feast. And it has to be the most expensive feast in the entire world, the kind so expensive it makes people weep. Seeing Wade looking exhausted to the point of soul separation, Su Ling couldn't help but chuckle. He stood up from the high point of the ruins, leapt easily, and landed steadily right in front of Wade. Su Ling had clearly witnessed the entire process of the Shotokan besieging Wade. Wade is a ridiculously powerful martial arts freak in the Marvel Universe. Even without the self-healing factor, he could crush a bunch of top-tier fighters purely based on his physical combat skills. Using him to test the combat effectiveness of the Shotokan was perfectly suitable. Su Ling's objective was clear. He needed to know if these shadow soldiers were just worthless cannon fodder. If they were, then having 1,000 or 10,000 of them would be meaningless. However, judging from the recent fight, these ninjas scored full marks in combat instinct, reaction speed, and coordination. Moreover, after death, as long as he, the host, willed it, they could leap out of the shadows once more. Tisk. I wonder how Jackie Chan managed to deal with these guys. Shaking his head, Su Ling checked his own body. There wasn't a trace of fatigue. Not only was he not tired, but he had become even more proficient in using the Shotokan. The horse talisman, this extremely heaven-defying existence, could be said to have given him a mobile blood pool. Su Ling's mind stirred slightly. Swish. All the shadow ninjas instantly transformed into streams of black shadow, rapidly rolling back into the crevices. They all vanished in the blink of an eye. Silence returned to the vast scrap yard. Wade looked around, even lifting his pant legs to check. God, this is simply unbelievable. He rubbed his slightly sore wrists. If my arms weren't aching like they'd been run over by a tractor, I would have thought everything just now was a hallucination. Su Ling walked up, reached out, pulled Wade, who was still sitting on the ground, up, and said with a smile. That was hard work, Wade. I'll treat you to a meal next time. Wade nodded. He deserved it. I still have some things to deal with. Su Ling waved at Wade. I won't interrupt your date with Vanessa. Huh. Leaving so soon. You haven't even seen the most handsome man in the world and the most. Before Wade could finish, Su Ling vanished from the spot with a whoosh. Wade reinserted the titanium alloy twin blades into the sheaths on his back, then walked in the direction they had come from, muttering as he went. I swear, that guy has said, I'll treat you to a meal next time, at least dozens of times back at the research institute. But the problem is, he never specifies the full time. Inside the mercenary bar, Su Ling held a bottle of special liquor that Weasel had mixed for him, which was actually sugar-free cola mixed with some unknown alcohol, staring intently at the man on the TV screen. On the screen, a man with a signature mustache, wearing black-rimmed glasses and a sharp suit, stood on the stage at a press conference. Tony Stark. The heir of Stark Industries, an existence capable of giving countless nations headaches. He stood before the microphone, gazing into the lens, and spoke. I have decided to close the Stark Industries weapons division. Effective immediately, starting now. Until I find a new direction for the company, and what I believe to be the correct goal. As everyone knows, the reason Stark Industries became a global corporate giant was precisely because of the arms trade. Whether it was war missiles, rockets, or the latest smart guidance systems, Stark Industries weapons accounted for nearly half of the global high-end arms market. To put it bluntly, the biggest source of profit for Stark Industries was war. But now, the long-missing Tony Stark returns, and his first announcement is to shut down this line of business, which is practically a cash cow. The destructive power of this statement was fiercer than any missile. Even Su Ling, an outsider, knew that doing this would cause more than half of Stark Industries' assets to collapse, and even the entire price structure of the arms black market would be completely disrupted. But unlike the average bystander, Su Ling, as a transmigrator, knew the truth behind it. This man, who had suddenly vanished for a long time and then abruptly reappeared before the cameras, didn't do this because he felt he had earned enough money. The reason he did this was that during his kidnapping, Tony personally witnessed the weapons developed by Stark Industries being used by terrorists, taking many lives. The cave in Afghanistan, the reactor in the cave, the escape. Is the Iron Man plot still proceeding normally? Su Ling took a sip of the drink, letting the liquid roll around on his tongue before swallowing. Just as he was recalling some details, Weasel's sarcastic complaint suddenly reached his ears. Tony Stark must have had his brain messed up by those terrorists. An arms dealer not selling arms. Is he planning to switch careers and open a brewery? Su Ling shrugged, offering no further comment on the matter. Tony's decision seemed crazy, but it was precisely his soul's turning point. He was just about to take another drink. Buzz. The air in front of Su Ling suddenly trembled. A blue virtual box, familiar beyond familiarity, abruptly popped out of the air. Ding. Mission name. This time, it's your turn to be the master. Mission content. Accept one superhero as a disciple, and grant them significant growth, 0/1. Mission reward. Plunder point *1. Su Ling nearly failed to hold it in, almost spitting the drink in his mouth onto Weasel. Accept a disciple. What kind of crazy mission is this? It's absolutely outrageous. He, a transmigrator, was already busy enough to be a perpetual motion machine, yet now he was supposed to become some superhero's master. By all accounts, this looked like an impossible mission to complete. Thanks for watching.